Story 1.
Husband discovers his wife's affair, plans cold revenge, then vanishes from her life for good. In the quiet glow of his laptop, Brad sat, swallowed up by silence, watching a scene that seemed to shatter everything he knew. There, on the screen, was a woman with short, curly blonde hair, the kind of look his wife, Marie, always had. She was smiling, full of excitement, as she walked into a room with a younger, taller guy. This guy was all muscle and smiles, a clear head taller than Brad and just as solid but leaner. As the two got closer, the guy took off his shirt, showing off a body that Brad couldn't help but notice was in pretty great shape. The sparks between them were obvious from the get-go. The woman, his Marie, didn't hold back, especially when her clothes started coming off, revealing the fancy lingerie set Brad remembered all too well. It was the same set Marie wore on their 25th anniversary, a night Brad had planned to be perfect, filled with dinner, dancing, and love at a fancy hotel. That night had been special, a celebration of their many years together, ending with them making love, wrapped up in each other. Brad had loved seeing Marie in that lingerie, thinking it suited her perfectly. Now, watching this video, those happy memories felt ruined. The video kept going, showing Marie and this guy getting more and more into each other. It was a side of Marie Brad had never seen before, wild, eager, completely different from the gentle, loving wife he knew. They had always been about soft, caring love, the kind that left them feeling close and happy. But what he was seeing now was the complete opposite. It was raw and intense, nothing like the love they shared. Seeing Marie with someone else in a way he never thought possible hit Brad hard. It was like he didn't even know her. They had shared a life, a bed, a love that he thought was deep and unshakable. But this video showed him a whole other side of Marie, a passion and desire he couldn't satisfy. It was a tough pill to swallow, realizing that their love, as he knew it, was gone. Brad was left to face the wreckage of his marriage, feeling lost and alone in the aftermath. He focused hard on the video and barely noticed his phone beep, showing he got a text from his wife. He stopped the awful video to read the message. "I'm on my way home from the store. Do you want anything special for dinner?" Brad replied, "Nothing special. See you when you get home." He planned to add "love you" at the end, but seeing her betray him made his heart cold. She texted back, "Okay, see you at home. Love you, baby." "Yeah, right," he muttered bitterly. He checked the time and knew she'd be home in about an hour. Marie, 52 years old, worked as an administrative assistant a few miles away at the admissions department of the local community college. She had worked there for a few years after leaving her previous job as a secretary for a small company. She usually went to work later than Brad and got off later too, so he was typically home before her unless he had to work overtime. Brad Klon, a 55-year-old financial analyst, had been working at his firm for the past dozen years. His job was stressful at times, as some of the firm's clients were well-off businessmen understandably concerned about their finances, so he devoted all his energy and concentration to his clients during working hours. He also had to travel occasionally, which was why he finally found out about his wife's cheating. A few months ago, he finished one of his required business trips to a nearby city. Usually he took a plane, but this time he drove instead. The drive took about the same amount of time as a flight, and on the way home, he decided on a whim to stop by the old cabin he and Marie owned to check on it. It was a small, rustic, one-bedroom vacation cabin in the hills, 45 minutes from their house. It had electricity, a working well, a small propane stove for cooking, and a fireplace for heat. Other than that, it lacked any other amenities. Marie's late father had owned it, and her mother had left it to Marie after she died. Since they acquired it, they had only stayed there 3 times in 10 years. The last visit was 2 years ago, when they spent a quiet weekend of solitude there. Since they almost never used it, Brad was thinking about selling it. He knew they wouldn't get much, it's not in the best condition. But it was located near a scenic lake on an acre of land in a small cluster of similar cabins. Unfortunately, there was no security, just a chain-link fence along the dirt road leading to the cabins. A retired farmer owned the land and built the cabins, selling them to fund his retirement. Brad wanted to check if anyone was squatting or had broken in. As he drove up the dirt road, he wondered who would want such a remote cabin. Maybe hunters, or an elderly couple like them, looking for a weekend getaway. They kept a key under a specific rock in the garden which Brad used to enter. Inside, he checked the water and found the well was working. In the bathroom, he noticed the shower curtain wasn't pushed all the way aside, unlike when they were last there. There were faint soap stains around the sink, which he remembered cleaning. Brad realized someone must have been there since he and Marie visited 2 years ago. Nothing was broken or missing, but chairs were moved in the kitchen, and minor changes were in the bedroom. He checked around, but didn't see anything else unusual. There were faint tire tracks in the driveway, but he couldn't tell how old they were. Other cabins were empty, and it seemed like nobody had visited in years except for the tire tracks. After checking for half an hour, Brad wondered what to make of it. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Did Marie come here and forget to tell him? It was hard to believe, but he had to consider it. If a squatter broke in, why wasn't anything damaged or out of place? If troublemakers had come, they would have left a mess and not bothered to put things back where they belonged. The shower curtain was almost in place, just not completely pushed aside. Whoever was there took care to make it seem like nobody had been there. It was only because Brad was meticulous that he noticed the difference. For some reason, he chose not to tell Marie. He wasn't usually suspicious, but something felt off. He trusted his wife, they'd been together for years, but this was too strange to ignore. The possibility that she knew something and wasn't telling him gnawed at him. He didn't want to confront her yet, not wanting to sound like he didn't trust her since it was just a feeling. He needed more proof before asking her about it. After that odd visit, Brad bought a pricey set of surveillance cameras. He installed them discreetly, one by the porch, one in the living room overlooking the kitchen, and the last in the bedroom, angled to see into the bathroom if the door was open. Without telling Marie, he started driving to the cabin every weekend to check the recordings. Since it only took 2 hours round trip, he could easily make excuses for his absence. In fact, Marie was away more than he was, shopping, visiting friends, or spending time at the health spa she had joined last year. She had lost weight and toned up, looking good for her age. The cameras were motion activated, so the first 2 times he found nothing recorded. He was starting to think it was a waste of time, but on the third visit there was footage. He hurriedly downloaded it and watched at the kitchen table before heading home. His heart sank when he saw his older, bottle-blonde wife and a much younger guy step out of a sports car in front of the cabin. They were smiling and laughing like old pals as they walked up to the door, holding hands. Just like before, Marie got the key from under the rock and let them in. Brad's hands clenched as he watched them enter the living room. The guy grabbed his wife as soon as the door closed, and they started kissing passionately. It was more proof of his wife's infidelity. That was the first time Brad saw evidence of her cheating. Watching her act like that made him sick to his stomach. He didn't throw up, but he was disgusted and upset. He sat there in shock for a while before leaving the cabin, feeling completely bewildered. He made sure everything was as he found it so Marie wouldn't know he'd been there. Brad had every reason to believe this wasn't the first time she used the cabin for affairs, and he suspected it wouldn't be the last. He checked the cameras to make sure they were still working and left, feeling heartbroken. He wanted nothing more than to go home, confront his wife, confront her lover, and destroy everything. During the drive home, he managed to calm down enough to think clearly. Until an hour ago, he had no idea she was cheating. He loved her deeply and always thought she felt the same about him. They often talked about cheaters, and Brad believed she shared his views on infidelity. Now he knew he was wrong. He needed more information before losing control. His late father always advised him not to react without thinking things through, but his dad never faced a situation like this. How could she betray him like this? Throughout the journey home, Brad searched desperately for any glimmer of hope for his falling-apart marriage. With each passing mile, troubling questions crowded his thoughts. Was this the only time she cheated? The way she acted with that guy made it seem unlikely, but what if it was? Since the recording had no sound, he didn't know what they talked about. Did he really want to end a 25-year marriage over one mistaken judgment? Until an hour ago, she had been a wonderful wife, or so he believed. Despite hating her, he still loved her deeply, which made her betrayal sting even more. One question hit him hard. If he divorced her, how could he ever find someone else at 55? He was overweight, not wealthy, and not particularly attractive. While he wasn't badly looking for his age, it was evident that his bedroom skills weren't enough to keep his wife faithful. Meanwhile, Marie still attracted guys, as evidenced by the disturbing video. She was still attractive for her age, and there were likely many men interested in her. But what about him? At 55, he wasn't a catch anymore. The chances of finding someone like her again were slim. With these thoughts swirling in his mind, he finally reached home. Fortunately, Marie wasn't there. She had left a note on the table saying she'd be out shopping and wouldn't return until dinner. Brad tore up the note in frustration, bitterly wondering if she was off cheating with that guy again. That was more than a month ago. Since then, he discovered 2 more videos of her having sex at the cabin, including the latest one where she was being intimate on the sofa. It was clear that it wasn't a one-time mistake, as all 3 videos showed her with the same man. Once Brad snagged that first recording of his dame's fling, he played it cool, took a page out of the playbook, acting like nothing was amiss with his wandering missus. But deep down, he was burning up, boiling over with suspicions. So he started paying attention, real close attention, every stitch of her clothes, every move she made, and every place she went. He clocked it. No private dicks for Brad, nah. He wanted to keep his cards close, just slipped a GPS tracker into Marie's ride and bingo, he had her mapped out on his computer screen like a hawk eyeing its prey. Her routine seemed squeaky clean except for the occasional shopping spree and her gym visits. Brad played hooky a few times, tailed her after work. Home sweet home was her usual stop unless it was a workout day. But it was that fancy health spa where she clocked in the most hours. Outside the homestead, months rolled by, and Brad noticed something fishy. Marie was pumping iron like never before. She'd always been a looker, no doubt about it. But now she was tighter than a drum, all toned up and slimmed down. Brad played the supportive hubby, cheering her on as she signed up for workout classes at the spa. He even applauded her progress, blind fool that he was. Then it hit him like a ton of bricks. That health spa wasn't just a gym, it was her rendezvous spot. The man in the video clearly spent a lot of time at the gym, evident from his muscular physique. Brad decided to tail his wife from work and got there before she did. He observed her entering and even saw her working out because the building had large windows at the front and good lighting. He parked his car discreetly at a distance and watched her interacting with the staff. It didn't take long to notice her friendliness with a particular young man who had short dark hair and a strong build. Brad took some pictures with his digital camera. He waited for her to leave and observed as she walked out the front door with the young man. They exchanged a few words by her car, having a friendly conversation that appeared normal. They seemed at ease, chatting, and whatever the guy said made Marie laugh. She even placed her hand on his arm as they talked. As she was about to leave, he put his arm around her waist and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek. Marie smiled up at him affectionately. Brad drove home, locked himself in his office, and looked up the guy on the spa's website. His name was Oscar Pitford, 28 years old, working as a personal trainer. Over the next few days, Brad spent time parked in front of the spa. He observed Oscar flirting with Marie when she arrived, giving her a lot of attention during her workouts, and escorting her to her car when she left. It was clear they were very familiar with each other. Oscar seemed to flirt with many women and was likely a playboy. Despite the age gap, Marie was an attractive, mature woman. He probably flirted with her during her workouts, found her receptive, and pursued her. Once they were involved, it was likely Marie's idea to use the cabin as their secret rendezvous spot. Brad begrudgingly acknowledged his wife's cunning choice. Using their house for her affair was risky because of nosy neighbors. Brad was there often enough that they might leave evidence of their cheating. A motel would leave a paper trail, and if it was local, someone might see them and tell her husband. However, the cabin was secluded, free, and far from home. Marie knew Brad never went there. As long as she kept it clean, Brad would never find out about her affair. It was the perfect place for cheating. If he hadn't checked on the place after his trip, he still wouldn't know about her betrayal. Despite finding the first video a week ago, Brad managed to hide his bitter best. It was hard not to confront her, but he left the house when he felt angry. He wanted to give himself time to plan. After watching the latest video of Marie with her lover, he was furious. He kept his cool even though she seemed to enjoy cheating. Even if she ended it, Brad didn't think he could stay with her. He couldn't understand why she treated him with such disrespect. No matter how much she apologized, Brad couldn't forgive her. Hiding his knowledge gave him time to prepare. As a numbers guy, he knew how to safeguard his assets in case of a split. With a hefty stash in the bank, he figured she wouldn't be walking away with half of squat. He harbored fantasies of leaving her destitute, but reality slapped him back. Ruining her and roughing up her lover danced in his mind, but he wasn't cut from that cloth. Violence? Nah, that would be playing right into the cops' hands, and he wasn't keen on cozying up to a jail cell. Sure, he was seething, but he wasn't some goon or a mobster with connections, just a regular Joe trying to keep his family ship from sinking. So he plotted his payback meticulously, all the while gearing up for the inevitable divorce. It wasn't a rosy outlook, but what choice did he have? The sound of her wheels in the garage put his gut in a vice grip. He fought to keep the rage from surfacing, maintaining his facade of ignorance. Once upon a time, her return home was the highlight of his day, but now it was a bitter pill to swallow. She walked into the kitchen, looking sharp as ever in her office getup, a picture of sophistication with her permed hair and a smile that once made his heart flutter. "Hey honey," she chirped, groceries in tow. "How's it hanging?" "Oh, okay," he replied with a tight smile. "Starving though. Got some steaks. Fire up the grill, I'll toss together a salad." Sounds like a plan, she agreed, heading for the kitchen, unaware of the storm brewing beneath her husband's calm exterior. He put on a calm expression and went out to the deck to handle the grill. It was hard to act normal after watching her latest cheating video. He used to enjoy when she came home so they could eat, share their day, and spend the evening together. Now he didn't see her in a positive light, and her presence upset him. He no longer saw her as his wife, just an aging woman involved with a younger lover. Despite this, he couldn't help but admire her acting skills. After treating him terribly, Marie came home each day acting cheerful and loving. If you didn't know better, you'd think she was the same faithful wife she always was. Of course, they were both pretending, but she was much better at it. For him, pretending was almost unbearable. Several times in the past few weeks, he almost let his anger out on her, but he managed to hold back. It was fascinating how she could keep her two lives separate. On one hand, she was cheating on him regularly, but at home she acted like a normal, faithful wife. Brad couldn't see any signs of her affair, no indication that she was sleeping with another man regularly. What was even more confusing was that she was offering him regular sex now. Before her affair, he had to practically beg for it. Now she was initiating it, even encouraging him. In the morning, Brad knew it was just pity sex to ease her guilt. But after seeing her with her lover, he doubted she felt guilty anymore. He used to think she was honest, but now she could lie convincingly, hiding her affair without any sign of deceit. After Brad finished grilling the steaks, they dug in without much chatter. Small talk floated around like a ghost at a seance, but mostly dinner was a silent ordeal. Marie, fidgety as a cat in a room of rocking chairs, barely touched her food, her eyes darting over to Brad like she was trying to read his mind. Brad, sensing the tension, kept his trap shut tight. One wrong word could crack his poker face wide open. Usually they'd cap off their meal with some Java and a sweet treat. Not tonight. Brad wolfed down his food, itching to bolt. He cleared the table in record time, seeking solace in the living room, in the glow of the tube. Marie trailed after him, wine in hand, plopping down beside him on the couch. Her gaze bore into him, making him wish he'd fled to his office instead. "Everything cool, Brad?" She piped up during a commercial break, her tone sugary sweet. Brad's stomach did a somersault. She was on to him. He fought to keep his composure, plastering on a smile. "I'm peachy," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "You seem a tad wound up today." She gave his arm a gentle rub. "Something on your mind? From work, honey?" Brad's throat tightened. "Nah, all good," he managed to croak out. Really let it drop there, but the dam of words threatened to burst. "Why ask me that?" he blurted out, eyes fixed on the TV screen. "I don't know, I guess." She sidled closer, her touch affectionate. "Maybe we need some us time." "It's been a while, you know," she teased, a nervous giggle bubbling up. "Really?" Brad choked out. "Yeah," she giggled back. "I miss you, honey. Starting to think maybe you're not into me anymore," she quipped, trying to play it off. Decades together, and they knew each other like the back of their hands. But in that moment, the laughter felt hollow, forced. Brad's chuckle sounded like a record scratch in the silence. "You," he stammered out. "Oh no, I am." They both chuckled nervously, but the tension hung thick in the air, suffocating any genuine mirth. She focused on the TV again, and they both sat quietly. Before, she used to hint about wanting sex often, but she usually said no when he asked. He didn't think too much about it. Sometimes she would make a move, and he never said no. Her hints were subtle, like smiling at the right time or touching suggestively. Sometimes, just a playful kiss as she sat on his lap would make him follow her to the bedroom eagerly. It used to be so simple, but now he knew she was being intimate with other guys. He used to be eager, almost desperate, to be with her intimately. Now he held back since she rarely offered. The lack of intimacy wasn't obvious, but after weeks without it, even Marie was starting to see that their sex life was non-existent. They were more like roommates than lovers now, and she was beginning to realize that. Brad worried he wouldn't be able to resist much longer. They hadn't been intimate in weeks, and knowing what she was doing made him extremely aroused. She was very passionate with her lover, but she had never been so forward with him in the past. It took her a while to get in the mood, but when she did, he couldn't resist her charm. Now, with her new appearance and experiences, she could be very tempting. He was almost finished with his plans, thankfully. Despite her suggestive behavior tonight, Brad was determined to wait. He didn't want to compete with her new lover. He was certain any intimacy between them would leave her unsatisfied. After seeing her intense reaction to the other guy's body, he knew she had never acted like that with him before. Over the past month, he had resolved not to respond to her advances. Whenever she made a suggestive remark, he acted as though he hadn't heard. In bed, he maintained a distance between them and feigned immediate sleep. Yet, he was aware that he couldn't continue to ignore her indefinitely. They once enjoyed a satisfactory, albeit sporadic, sexual relationship. He had believed in their compatibility until a video revealed her uninhibited side, shaking his confidence in his ability to please her. He suspected her expressions of love and pleasure were feigned, not wanting to disappoint her by failing in his attempts. She never exhibited the same intensity with him as she did with Pitford, and he was convinced she never would. Beside him, Marie sighed and hinted, "Thought you might want to head to bed early tonight." "Are you tired?" he inquired. She giggled and playfully slapped his arm. "I'm not. How about we go to bed now, maybe, "Yeah, I know," he responded, his skin flushing and sweat forming. He could feel her gaze, puzzled by his lack of enthusiasm towards her clear proposition. "Maybe later," he stated calmly. "You go ahead. I'd like to watch the show a bit longer." She sighed in disappointment, and he sensed her warmth beside him. The scent of her blonde hair and spicy perfume enticed him. He tried to suppress his desire and avoided her bewildered look. Despite his efforts to quell his longing, his love for her made it an impossible task. She returned her attention to the TV, baffled by his hesitance, her pride wounded by his rejection. Brad resolved to let her experience rejection for once. Even as Marie yawned loudly and stretched in a manner that accentuated her figure, aiming to capture his attention, he remained fixated on the television. When his lack of reaction to her was apparent, Marie sighed. "Guess I'm tired, honey. I'm heading to bed now. Care to join?" It was an offer he hadn't encountered in years. "I'll be up soon," he replied nonchalantly. "Just wake me when you come up. I might not fall asleep right away," she hinted. "Okay, see you soon," she said, giving him a prolonged look before departing for the bedroom. Brad felt a sense of relief as he stayed in the living room for another 3 hours. It was past 1 when he finally entered the bedroom to ensure she was asleep before he joined her. Sleep eluded him, and he awoke early, still fatigued. He quietly left the bed, dressed in the guest room to avoid disturbing her. Clinging to his pride, he refused to be intimate with her amidst her infidelity. He longed for the days when closeness with his wife was uncomplicated. However, since she initiated this situation, he would not pretend everything was normal or reward her behavior. If she desired sexual intimacy so desperately, she could seek out her lover. Her betrayal was her choice, and it was no longer his responsibility to ensure her happiness. The atmosphere at home became increasingly tense. Marie was perplexed, wondering if there was a problem, as their communication had dwindled and affection was scarce. He occasionally spoke during dinner but never initiated physical contact. When she embraced him, he became rigid sometimes. He even flinched at her touch. Clearly, something was troubling him, but he remained silent on the issue. She attempted to engage him in conversation, but he either diverted the topic or evaded her concerns altogether. The loving connection they once shared through actions and words had evidently dissipated, making dialogue with him more challenging than ever before. The following night, Marie tried to seduce him again. Just like before, he seemed uninterested. She wondered if he knew about her affair but dismissed the idea quickly because she and Oscar had been discreet. Only their close friends knew they even knew each other. They acted friendly during workouts to avoid suspicion but kept things proper. Any physical contact they had was away from the spa and people they knew. The sexual pleasure she got from her younger lover was saved for their visits to her father's old cabin. Marie was worried about Brad's behavior, but not too much. She still loved him and wanted to be supportive if he had a problem. She never thought whatever was wrong would endanger their marriage. She figured it must be a work issue, something that happened occasionally. She was disappointed they hadn't been intimate for so long. She believed he must be getting aroused, but that wasn't her fault. She had offered herself more in the past month than in years, and she wasn't even aroused. Still, she didn't want Brad to feel ignored and wondered why he didn't want her anymore. Was he not attracted to her anymore? That didn't seem possible. She was in better shape than she had been for years. He was getting older. Maybe he's already losing his interest in sex? It was funny how Brad seemed less interested in sex, while her own desires were growing. Lately, she was catching the eye of younger guys everywhere. Her improved figure didn't go unnoticed by the men at her workplace. Being around college guys all day, Marie was regularly approached. So many guys were interested in her that she had to be careful not to encourage them and maintain a professional distance. With her secret lover, she satisfied her cravings, but still wanted her husband to be happy. Their bed life had never been very exciting, so she wasn't too worried that he was distant. She would continue being the loving wife to Brad and save her intense sexual desires for her young lover. Marie knew her affair would cool off eventually, but for now, it was still passionate. Whenever possible, she'd meet Oscar at the cabin for a couple of hours of thrilling sex, then she'd clean up and return to her usual. albeit somewhat monotonous, life with her unsuspecting husband. After their tryst, she made sure to clean everything thoroughly to avoid any suspicion if Brad ever visited the cabin. They never used the bed for sex, opting for other places that were easier to clean. Despite Brad's behavior, she wasn't willing to give up her affair. As the next week passed, Brad's indifferent attitude bothered her. She wondered if he suspected something was amiss and decided to take a break from her affair, at least until her husband returned to normal. She informed Oscar they should take a break, and he felt disappointed. He believed she was worrying over nothing but agreed. By the second week of their break, she struggled to keep her mind off sex. She constantly daydreamed about the cabin and yearned for Oscar's passionate lovemaking. She didn't want to get involved with anyone else, but working at a college meant being around many attractive men. She found herself fantasizing about colleagues and feeling susceptible to any attention from handsome guys. Before her affair, Marie hardly noticed her male co-workers, as she wasn't very physically inclined and didn't prioritize sex much. However, since starting the affair and experiencing regular passionate encounters with a young lover, she found she couldn't do without it anymore. When her desires became overwhelming, she decided to end her celibacy. During her weekly workout, she informed Oscar she was available again, expressing her desire to restart their affair, and he agreed. They maintained a respectable distance from each other that day, pretending everything was normal. As he walked her to her car, they made plans to meet the following week to resume their relationship. Brad mentioned a business meeting that day, giving her a few precious hours to sneak away. Marie returned home feeling rejuvenated and spent the evening with her husband. He was quiet again, and although Brad seemed more somber than usual, she brushed off any concerns. He had been distant for weeks, showing no interest in a physical relationship. But with the anticipation of passionate encounters next week, she pushed aside her frustrations. As Brad moped around the house, avoiding her, Marie gave him space and tried to maintain a friendly atmosphere between them. Her cheerful mood continued at work on Friday. Even her boss noticed and asked why she was so happy. "Oh, nothing special," Marie replied with a smile. "Things have just been going well for me lately. I'm happy with how my life is going." "Did Brad get a promotion? Or did you win the lottery?" her supervisor joked. "Or maybe you're having a second honeymoon?" "Nothing like that," Marie chuckled. "I'm just grateful for my home life. Brad has been wonderful and I appreciate everything I have. Things aren't perfect, but they could be a lot worse." "That's a great attitude. I wish everyone thought like that, Marie," her boss remarked. After work, Marie went home feeling elated. She couldn't wait for her upcoming meeting with her lover. Feeling extremely aroused, she wanted to take a shower as soon as she got home to cool down. When she entered the kitchen, she was delighted to find Brad had already prepared dinner. She hugged him tightly, surprised when he hugged her back and kissed her cheek. "This is wonderful, Brad," she exclaimed, admiring the meal. "Would you like some wine with dinner, honey?" he asked. "Yes, I'd love a glass," she replied suggestively, "but I don't want to get too sleepy because I want to reward you later for making such a delicious meal." "Your smile is reward enough for me, darling," Brad said. "Oh no," Marie giggled. "I'm going to give you something much better than a smile tonight. It's been too long since we've been together, and I want to show my wonderful husband how much I love him." Brad smiled back and said, "I think you're wonderful too." They ate and chatted normally for a change. Marie was glad to see Brad opening up. After cleaning up together, they went to the living room to watch TV, their usual routine. But tonight, with Marie's upbeat attitude, she was determined to seduce her husband. It had been weeks since they had any physical contact, and she missed it. Despite his age, Brad remained an attractive, healthy man, undoubtedly with unmet sexual needs. Even though she had a lover on the side, she was still eager to fulfill her husband's desires, determined to do so tonight. Thankfully, he seemed to be in a better mood than usual. During a commercial break, she touched Brad's arm and excused herself, heading to the bedroom to change into more revealing clothing. She knew he liked her in skimpy attire, so she opted for a thin tank top and tight shorts from the dresser. Feeling daring, she decided to skip wearing a bra, knowing the tiny top and bikini panties would surely arouse even her indifferent husband. As she admired her reflection in the mirror, she couldn't help but smile at how alluring she appeared, proving that even at her age, she still looked attractive. Confident that Brad would be unable to resist her, she eagerly made her way back to the living room to seduce him. Upon her return, she found Brad in the kitchen, so she sat on the sofa, assuming a seductive pose, and waited. When he joined her with a beer and another glass of wine, she flashed him a sultry smile and patted the seat beside her. His eyebrows rose at the sight of her outfit, and she could feel the tension building between them as he took his seat. "I filled your glass," he told her, handing her the drink. I hope you wanted more. Yes, I'm definitely in the mood for more, she replied, dropping hints as subtly as she could. I'm in the mood for something else too, darling, he remarked. I can see, she replied with amusement, knowing she looked alluring and available. Although she rarely felt this attracted to her husband, tonight was an exception. She couldn't help but wonder how her lover would react to seeing her like this. However, she was careful not to appear too needy and let Brad make the first move, as it was important to maintain her ego. So she sat close to him, making sure he noticed her, signaling her readiness, hoping he'd initiate. But he remained fixated on the TV. Eventually, she inched nearer, sipping her wine and attempting to cuddle up to him. She even rested her head on his shoulder and gently rubbed his arm, expecting him to respond, but he still didn't look at her. As the next show started, she began to feel tired and frustrated with his indifference. Despite feeling drowsy from the wine, she didn't realize Brad had slipped a sleeping pill into her drink. Soon enough, she drifted off on the sofa, only to wake up later in the dark, covered with a blanket, with Brad nowhere to be seen. Confused and half asleep, she mumbled to herself, noticing it was 4 a.m. Without changing, she crawled into bed next to him, feeling exhausted and annoyed. The next day, she felt resentful about his lack of attention, thinking he missed out on an opportunity for intimacy. She got up late, realizing it was nearly noon, and found Brad in the kitchen. "Morning, honey," he greeted her cheerfully. "Want some coffee?" "Yeah, sure," she replied flatly. "What happened last night?" "You fell asleep," he explained with a smile. "I figured you had a tough week, and we tired you. You looked so peaceful, I didn't want to wake you." "You should have woken me," she said, slightly irritated. "I know," he replied vaguely. "By the way, Marie, how about we go away for the weekend?" "Go away," she echoed, still groggy and confused. "Yeah, let's go to the cabin for a couple of days," he suggested with a grin. "We've both been working hard lately and haven't spent much time together." Marie tried to clear her head as she sipped her coffee. "The cabin? We haven't been there in years." "I know, but we could use some time together, you know," Brad persisted. "It's so peaceful there. I bet we can reconnect and have some fun." "Fun?" she repeated, still trying to wake up fully. Marie's mind cleared as her eyes suddenly opened. Was he suggesting they have sex after leaving her hanging last night? She wasn't expecting this. "Fun, huh?" she asked. "Yeah," Brad chuckled. "I know I'm not that romantic, but maybe if we break from our usual routine, something might click. It's just for the weekend since we both have work on Monday, but it could be fun. What do you think?" Marie shrugged. "I guess so. We need to go to the store and get some things." "I already got everything yesterday," Brad said. "Well, aren't you prepared?" Marie teased. "Yeah, always prepared," he laughed. "I think we should clean up, get dressed, and head out. Let's start our weekend right now." As Marie thought about it, she grew more anxious. Why not? A weekend away with her husband might help their relationship. The way he was talking, she might even get to seduce him. "Okay, let me change and pack a bag," she said. "Great," Brad exclaimed eagerly. "I already have my stuff packed. I'll put it in the car and we can leave shortly." On the way to the cabin, Marie tried to use her cell phone but found it wasn't working. "Oh darn it," she said, punching buttons on the phone. "I thought it was charged up, but I guess the battery is dead." "That's okay, sweetheart," Brad reassured her. "You can use mine if you want." "No, it's okay. It's nothing important. I'll just wait until we get to the cabin and charge it up." An hour and a half later, they arrived at the cabin, put the food in the fridge, and made sandwiches. Marie felt happy but a little apprehensive as she looked around the small cabin. She searched for any signs of her affair, but as they settled in, she didn't see anything unusual, and Brad didn't notice anything either. After finishing their food, they took a walk around the lake, talking, laughing, and enjoying the beautiful surroundings. Brad held her hand, pointing out things he wanted her to see. He even hugged her a couple of times and caught her when she tripped. He was friendlier than he had been in months, and Marie was thrilled. It felt so good that she almost felt guilty, knowing she would be cheating on him in this very place in a few days. The afternoon was great, and the evening was even better. Marie hadn't felt this close to her husband in a long while. Once they returned to the cabin, she took a risk and kissed him. He welcomed her affection. When it got dark, Brad played some music and they opened a bottle of wine. As they drank, he shared funny stories from their past years of marriage. Marie, feeling a bit tipsy, tried to encourage him to hold her. When he wrapped his arms around her slim body, she felt anticipation building within her. The romantic ambiance persisted when they went to bed. Unlike at home, they lay side by side tonight, tenderly kissing and caressing each other. Marie was eager for her husband to make love to her finally. "It's been so long, please, honey," she whispered, parting her legs invitingly. "Don't tease me anymore. I'm yours. Go ahead and take me, I'm so ready," she urged. You are? He teased back. God, yes, I could scream. Can't you tell? She tried to focus on her husband, but she couldn't help comparing the slow, intimate lovemaking with her lover's passionate encounters. Both were thrilling, but what she was experiencing now felt more fulfilling. Brad's love for her was evident in everything he said and did, including their intimate moment together. However, Oscar simply desired sex. There was no love involved between them, and she knew it. He only wanted sex. During their time together, he treated her like a mindless blow-up doll. While she enjoyed the attention, she would never trade it for what she was experiencing now. Unsure of the time, she heard a noise outside. It seemed early for them to go to bed, but without TV to watch, it felt appropriate to turn in early. Another suspicious noise caught their attention, making her and Brad alert. "What's that?" Brad whispered with alarm. "Is someone outside?" "I don't know," she whispered back. Another noise, possibly on the porch, made Marie sit up, suddenly afraid. "What should we do?" she whispered. Brad pushed the covers back and quietly got out of bed. "You stay here," he told her firmly. "I'll go check it out." As Brad moved to his bag and took something out, the doorknob rattled, sending Marie into a panic. Before she could see what Brad was doing, the front door swung open, revealing a dark figure. Marie realized it must be a home invasion and screamed in terror. In a flash, the room erupted into chaos. A deafening bang pierced the air, followed by another. Marie's world spun as she realized her old man had popped a cap in the intruder. From the safety of the bedroom, she heard the thud of the man hitting the ground, clawing at his neck where the bullet found its mark. Another scream clawed its way out of her throat, disbelief gripping her like a vice. "Oh my God!" she wailed, hands flying to her face as she crumpled. Brad, cool as a cucumber, edged toward the downed man, gun steady in his grip. With a cautious touch, he checked for signs of life, then ventured outside to ensure they were in the clear. Returning to flick on the lights, he unknowingly flipped the switch on Marie's nightmare. Her brain reeled, eyes widening in horror as she beheld the lifeless figure on the floor, Oscar. Sobbing uncontrollably, she was barely coherent when Brad approached, pulling her close, murmuring reassurances. "It's all over, honey," he whispered, his voice a lifeline amidst the chaos. "We're safe." Her thoughts tumbled in disarray as Brad comforted her. Eventually, he spoke again, his tone grave. "We gotta call the cops," he said, his words hanging heavy in the air. "They'll want to snoop around, treat this like a damn crime scene, just stay put." Marie collapsed onto the bed, tears flowing freely. Brad watched her grimly, waiting until she stumbled to the bathroom, overcome with nausea. Seizing the opportunity, he snagged her cell, deftly disabling it before slipping it back into her purse. Returning to the body, he plucked an envelope from the dead man's jacket containing a note, with a bitter scowl. Brad read the words he'd penned at a library miles away and planted on Oscar's car earlier that day. "This Zex coupon is valid for tonight only. Please bring it and redeem it for an evening of intense Zex. I apologize for the short notice, but I just found out he's away this weekend. Can you meet me at the cabin, lover? I hope so, and I'll make it worth your while. Signed, your faithful partner." He crumpled the note and went outside. Her lover's car was parked in the driveway. The cabin was in a dead zone, making it difficult to get a good cell phone signal. He called out, "Marie, I'll be right back. I'm trying to call the cops, but I'm having trouble getting a signal. Let me go out back and see if I can get through." He hurried to the lake, to a spot hidden by shrubs, and lit the note and envelope on fire with a lighter. He watched them turn to ashes, ensuring there was no evidence left. Then he rubbed the black ashes between two rocks and covered them with leaves, erasing all traces of his deceitful plan. He took a moment to calm his emotions. He had never killed anyone before. He knew what would happen when he placed the note on Pitfor's car this morning. However, committing murder was emotional. He regretted ending the guy's life like this, but with the rage he had harbored for so long, he knew it was inevitable. His hands were still trembling as he made the call to the police. Now it was up to him to keep his nerves steady and let the situation unfold. He had already taken down all the surveillance cameras and hidden the videos in a place where nobody would ever find them. It was fortunate that he kept his knowledge of her affair to himself. Once the cops started questioning his wife, everything would come out. Even if she didn't confess, it wouldn't take long for the police to discover she was a member of the health spa where he worked, linking her to her lover. The police arrived in less than an hour. Brad was waiting for them and admitted to shooting the intruder. They confiscated his gun and bagged it as evidence. When asked, he assured them that he hadn't moved or touched the body since the shots were fired. His wife corroborated the same story. The cops became immediately suspicious when they learned the intruder used a key to open the door. How did he know it was there? Brad explained about the key but claimed ignorance. However, when they questioned Marie, she broke down almost immediately. She confessed that she and Pitfor had been there before. Brad pretended to be shocked, and his acting seemed convincing as the cops exchanged suspicious glances. Both were taken to the station for questioning. The forensic team arrived soon after and meticulously examined the cabin. At the station, Brad contacted a lawyer he had used before. Following the lawyer's instructions, he refused to say anything further until the lawyer arrived. On the other hand, Marie spilled everything. She was devastated by her lover's death and bewildered by how it had happened. Losing all control, the cops capitalized on her vulnerability to extract details about her affair spanning months. Brad didn't mind her confession. She was unaware of his ambush and couldn't disclose anything incriminating. After spending a long night and part of the next day in custody, both husband and wife were released but instructed not to leave town. Despite weeks of questioning and investigations, no incriminating evidence was found regarding the shooting. Brad sensed their suspicion, but lacking evidence, they had to classify the shooting as justified homicide. Breaking into someone's home in the middle of the night was undoubtedly a crime, and any jury would likely side with the homeowner. Although there were lingering questions, the jury would likely give the homeowner the benefit of the doubt. Brad took his wife home on Sunday. She was distraught and kept apologizing for cheating until he finally told her to stop. He already knew about everything and maintained a confused look as she confessed all the details. He regretted having to end the young man's life but saw no other way to get rid of him and restore his pride. Returning to work on Monday, he left his wife to deal with her own issues. She was a wreck. When he returned home, a neighbor was there to support her, preventing her from losing her composure. That evening, after a brief dinner, he confronted her about the affair. She cried throughout, offering the typical excuses and pleas for forgiveness. Her excuses fell on deaf ears, and he served her with divorce papers on Thursday. At home, she hadn't returned to work and nearly collapsed upon receiving the divorce papers, having lost both her husband and lover in the same week. Brad, concerned for her well-being, took her to the emergency room as she cried uncontrollably. Packing a suitcase for her, she pleaded with him to stay and forgive her. "What am I going to do now?" she asked. With little sympathy, he responded, "I don't know. We're getting divorced, Marie. You're no longer my concern." Despite her declaration of love, Brad callously retorted, "Just go find another lover, Marie. You seem to have no trouble finding them. Just make sure he's as well endowed as the one you were involved with." His harsh words left her inconsolably sobbing as he departed, never to return to the home. Though Brad was never charged with a crime, authorities kept a close eye on him, questioning acquaintances about the homicide. The suspicion cast a shadow over his career, leading him to eventually leave his job. However, he soon found another position and managed to stay afloat financially. They sold their house and cabin, splitting the proceeds. Brad received half of the marital assets and kept additional funds hidden from Marie. With her lawyer investigating their finances, he had to maintain a lower standard of living and remain vigilant for anything incriminating. Despite the shooting and divorce, Brad carried on with life. He started an exercise routine at home, improving his physique and losing weight. He stayed in touch with his daughter, who hoped for reconciliation, but he firmly declined. Despite insecurities about his attractiveness, Brad began dating older women, finding companionship and enjoyment in their company. It took some time, but he eventually built up the courage to ask someone out, finding solace in socializing and reconnecting with female company. He wasn't ready for another long-term relationship yet. With a successful career and many good years ahead at 55, he still attracted female attention. In the months following his divorce, he found himself less lonely than expected while he adjusted to normal life. Gradually, Marie spiraled into depression, struggling to overcome the shock of the events. Her once carefree attitude toward life and love vanished. Despite her lingering love for her husband, who divorced her, and the loss of her younger lover, she couldn't regain control of her emotions to seek companionship. The vibrant bed life she once enjoyed disappeared after the divorce and seemed irretrievable. Regular therapy sessions and medication helped her cope with her mental health struggles, while her declining physical health led her daughter to arrange medical care. She stopped exercising and gained weight, becoming increasingly reclusive and abandoning the spa that initiated her troubles. Brad learned from friends that she planned to move out of state to escape the harsh gossip surrounding her affair.
Story 2.
I discovered my wife's cheating and crafted a multi-layered revenge she could not escape. I informed my wife, Emily, that my seminar ended a day earlier than planned, but I couldn't change my flight, so I'd be back on Tuesday night. She was supposed to pick me up at the airport around 6. She expressed some frustration about me being away for another night, but said she would be delighted to see me after. Thinking about it for an hour, I realized I had been away from home a lot and should prioritize my wife, with whom I've lived for 17 years. I decided to go to the airport and make an effort to change something. I almost gave up, but then noticed there was a flight to an airport near our hometown. The airport I usually use is about an hour north of our place, but the other airport was almost 2 hours to the south, and I'd never used it before. I checked and found there was a flight leaving for that airport in half an hour, so I went to the counter to purchase a ticket. I was surprised at how easy it was. An hour later, I was in the air, and 3 hours later, I landed. I rented a car and expected to be home around midnight. Emily had to find a way to express her joy at my early return. I mentally listed some assumptions and smiled to myself. I decided not to call her and wanted to make my return a complete surprise. It was just before midnight when I arrived home. The house was dark and Emily's car was gone. I found it peculiar as I brought my bag inside and unpacked, wondering where she could be at this hour, but deciding not to jump to conclusions. I called her cell phone and she answered on the third ring. I greeted her and pretended to check on her well-being. She informed me that it was well past midnight and she had been asleep. She assured me that she would be at the airport the next morning at 6 to pick me up. I was puzzled and curious about her being asleep, but not at home. I inquired about her whereabouts, mentioning that I had tried calling our home phone but got the answering machine instead. She explained that she was in bed and that our phone didn't work, mentioning a repairman scheduled for the next day. My head was spinning as I wondered whether she was in bed upstairs. I had been unpacking in the same room and hadn't seen her. It seemed unlikely that she was blatantly lying to me, but I couldn't help but wonder why. I then informed her that I wouldn't be on the 6th flight and that I'd be staying a few more days. I promised to call her when I had the exact time and day for my return. She expressed her longing for me and asked me to come home as soon as I could. I assured her that I couldn't wait to see her and said my goodbyes. As I finished the call, I couldn't help but notice a hint of laughter in her voice. I dialed my home phone number and it rang normally. I would contemplate answering the phone and having a witty conversation with myself, but I didn't have the heart to do it. I went up to our room and searched under the bed and in other hiding spots. I thought to myself, ladies and gentlemen, Elvis has left the building. I'm in sales, not rocket science, but my instincts were sharp and I sensed something suspicious. How foolish had I been? Quite foolish. That was my honest assessment. The next morning, I got up early and moved the rental car to the other side of the street. Around 7 in the morning, I saw Emily's car pull up to the house with a man driving. I hid in the junk closet in the foyer with the door slightly ajar. Emily unlocked the door and they entered. She informed him that she needed to change and get ready for work. She mentioned getting clothes for the next day to avoid returning in the morning and said she'd be back in 10 minutes. He chuckled and replied that he'd help, but then he'd have to make love to her again. Emily playfully warned him that she'd have to fire him for being late and mentioned that he seemed to enjoy the fact that she worked under him. She also commented on how his wife considered her the perfect secretary. I couldn't help but wonder what she would say to his wife, considering she found him obnoxious and arrogant. He had only been with the company for a couple of weeks, as far as I could remember. He laughed and mentioned that he had already told his wife about Emily, noting that she was the same age as his wife's mother and much lighter in weight. He joked that when his wife saw Emily, he'd have to fire her anyway. He then added that he had informed his wife he'd be house hunting that week and might not be away from the hotel for a couple of days. Emily rejoined them, and they shared a laugh. She looked stunning, and her boss was named Mr. Boss. They embraced, and he gave her a slow, passionate kiss. I felt tempted to grab an umbrella from the shelf and voice my disapproval. He suggested that she spend the following night with him, going out for dinner and returning by 8 p.m. He mentioned the possibility of showing her the lodge after talking to the owner. Emily recommended the idea and playfully asked what kind of tour he would like, adding, "What if my husband comes home early?" His name was Jeff. Jeff reassured her, mentioning that I would call him to arrange a pickup at the airport, giving him a day's notice. He emphasized that if I didn't call today, I wouldn't be returning home tomorrow. Emily found this satisfactory and replied, suggesting that I was a SEAL and that, in the unlikely event of any issue, I'd probably offer Jeff a beer and apologize for any inconvenience. Jeff, in turn, suggested that I sounded like a pushover and that his wife would be furious and potentially cause him trouble if he cheated on her. Emily chimed in, saying that fear kept most men in line, though he didn't seem too afraid of his wife most of the time. Jeff responded by explaining that he'd be in deep trouble if he cheated and would be lucky to save his life. He added that his wife was in Houston, which made him feel relatively safe. That's when I stopped listening as they left the room. My face turned red, and I felt my blood pressure rise. Not only had my wife been unfaithful, but she also appeared to dislike me. I sat down to contemplate the situation, and a plan slowly began to take shape. I recalled that Emily had mentioned her new boss was being transferred from the company headquarters in Houston. I needed to find out his name, so I made a few phone calls. A few discreet questions to the female receptionist at Emily's workplace quickly provided me with all the information I needed. His name was Jeffrey Ross, and he had a wife and 2 teenage children. She would stay in Texas until the kids finished their school year, and then they would join Jeffrey in Springfield. He would search for a house every night after work. I searched for the last name Ross in Houston on the internet directory and found 3 Jeff Rosses in Houston. With my first call, I hit the jackpot. I inquired if she was Mrs. Jeffrey Ross, and she affirmed, asking how she could assist me. I asked if her husband worked for the Halifax company, and she confirmed that he did. I fabricated my identity, claiming to be Don Watson from Halifax, and mentioned planning a small party for her husband, Jeff, and her. I explained that they would receive round-trip tickets to Springfield as a surprise for Jeff. She responded positively and inquired about the date of the event. I refrained from giving a direct answer and instead conveyed that the event would take place the following night. I provided flight details and explained that the company would reimburse Jeff for the expenses. I emphasized the need for secrecy, and she promised not to divulge the information to anyone. Next, I started calling Emily's friends and family to invite them to her surprise party. I informed them that Emily had received a promotion from her boss, which warranted celebration. Everyone was pleased with the explanation and the need to keep it a secret from Emily. I asked them to arrive at our house by 7 p.m. to ensure Emily's presence. To ensure a smooth party, I contacted a local restaurant and ordered food and drinks, specifying that it should be set up on the veranda next to the living room by our pool. This was a special touch, as Emily had always wanted a party on that veranda. I left instructions for the caterers and explained that the house might be empty when they arrived, but they could set everything up on the outdoor veranda by going around the house. The next day, I arrived at the airport half an hour early. As passengers were heading to the baggage area, I approached a couple of unaccompanied women and inquired if they were Mrs. Ross. While talking to one of the women, I heard someone addressing me. She introduced herself as Mrs. Ross and asked if I was there to pick her up. I was almost speechless when I saw her. She looked like a movie star. I introduced myself as Ron and explained that my wife worked for her husband. I decided to think on my feet, as she seemed a bit suspicious. I humorously mentioned that I was often told I had married an older and larger woman, but reassured her that it was just because my wife had more experience and there was more to love. She pondered this for a moment and then smiled, and I felt relieved. We collected her luggage and headed to the parking lot. When we arrived at my house at 6:30, I explained to Mrs. Ross that it was an outdoor party in honor of her husband and also a celebration for my wife's birthday. As the guests began to arrive, the caterer completed the setup, and I was genuinely impressed. It looked like a top-notch party, and I hadn't realized it could be organized so seamlessly. By 7:30, everyone I had invited was in place. I asked them to park behind the church, a half-block away, so our driveway would be clear. I explained to everyone that I would hide in the living room, and when the guests of honor pulled up to the house, I would turn off the patio lights. This would be a signal for them to be very quiet. We had sliding glass doors leading to the veranda, and there were vertical blinds that could be adjusted using cords. One cord opened the blinds horizontally, while another separated them. We also had heavy curtains that we used during cold weather. These curtains were large enough for me to hide behind as I reached for the cords of the vertical blinds and the light switch on the veranda. A few minutes before 8, I noticed Emily's car pulling up in front of the house. I turned off the lights on the deck and concealed myself behind the curtains to create a quiet ambiance. The door opened, and I could hear Emily and Jeff laughing. I thought to myself that it was reassuring to know they were enjoying themselves. Jeff, in a light-hearted manner, expressed his eagerness for some private time, mentioning that they rarely had a moment alone. He helped Emily remove her dress, revealing that she was wearing only a thong. They both seemed to be in high spirits. As Emily playfully took off her thong, she commented on Jeff's constant playfulness, and he pushed her onto my chair and their liaison began. Carefully, I turned on the light. Emily was taken aback and demanded an explanation for my presence, her question appearing somewhat simplistic to me given the circumstances. I calmly reminded her that this was my house, emphasizing that my name was on the deed. She expressed surprise at my early return, and I casually acknowledged it. Jeff muttered something about needing to leave and having matters to attend to. I offered him a drink, which seemed to surprise both him and Emily. I could tell Jeff was contemplating Emily's earlier assumption that I would offer him a beer if I caught them together. I couldn't help but smile as I observed his thought process. Before Jeff could respond, his wife abruptly entered the room from the veranda, clutching a large purse and waving it about vigorously. His Surprise left him virtually defenseless, and he ended up about 5 feet away from his previous position. Subsequently, Emily's mother and sister joined the scene. Emily, still undressed, received a scolding from her mother, who instructed her to get dressed and jokingly suggested she consider a career in adult entertainment after the recent performance. Emily was too shocked to respond, and when I turned on the porch light, she realized that 20 other people were looking at her. I went outside, grabbed some potato salad and wings, and fetched a can of beer from the fridge. I returned to my seat and observed Jeff's struggle to sit down as well as Emily's attempts to regain her composure. The entire situation was undoubtedly frustrating, and I couldn't help but think that I wasn't the one responsible for this mess. Emily and Jeff had placed themselves and their loved ones in this uncomfortable situation. Ultimately, it was better for everyone to know the truth and move forward. As time passed, the situation settled down. Emily's cousin took Mrs. Ross to the motel, while another cousin assisted Jeff to the car and provided him with a ride to the motel. Emily's mother asked if Emily wanted to go with them, but Emily declined. Her mother expressed understanding of my likely upset and acknowledged that Emily deserved a good scolding but believed she was already suffering. Enough. Then they departed. Emily hid in the bathroom, and I heard the shower running. I've never enjoyed beer and wings so much, sitting alone and reflecting on the events of the evening. I thought to myself that, once or twice in life, everything aligns perfectly and the plan actually works. After finishing my salad and wings, I began cleaning up. Cleaning up after this crowd took quite a bit of time. I had to store the leftovers in the fridge and freezer. It was past midnight when I sat down at the table with the last beer of the evening, finally able to relax. Emily entered the room and took a seat across from me. I asked her if she was happy, and if that's what she wanted. I wondered why people started forming such opinions. I questioned whether I had done anything to give them that impression, and even suggested it might have been her doing. She responded by mentioning the incident when I got caught with my boss. She wondered if anyone would think that's what promiscuous women do. Emily expressed her frustration at me for not coming to her if we had any problems, instead of inviting the whole neighborhood over. I grinned and asked her if we had a problem. She continued, explaining that she never meant to be rude with me and that she never thought I would find out about my boss. She accused me of intentionally hurting her. I pointed out that hosting a surprise party for my beloved wife at our house couldn't be worse than being unfaithful outside of our marriage. I suggested that not many people would agree with her perspective. Finally, she said what I had been waiting to hear for so long. Emily reasoned that if I had been around more, none of this would have happened. She claimed that I hadn't paid enough attention to her, making her vulnerable to Jeff's advances. I couldn't help but laugh heartily. She was trying to blame me and make me apologize for her own actions. She appeared so foolish to me. As I closed the bedroom door behind me and locked it, a profound satisfaction washed over me. My chains had been broken. I was emotionally liberated and soon to be legally free. I eagerly anticipated my new life. All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned, and let's dive in. You know, I should be at work right now, but instead, I'm surprisingly calm, sitting at the kitchen table enjoying a cup of freshly brewed coffee. I needed this to ease my nerves. I've always found this to be a very soothing routine. I used to do it regularly when our kids were young. I'd wake up about an hour earlier than the rest of the household just to savor the peace and quiet. It was sort of a hobby of mine. I'm Evan Johnson, to be precise. I've been happily married for 25 years. Well, I was happily married until a couple of hours ago. We have 4 children, and the last one moved out last year. My wife seemed to be struggling with what she called empty nest syndrome. I think so I encouraged her to find a hobby. I think she found one an hour ago. I didn't know his name. She just kept calling him Stallion and urging him on with phrases like, "Do it, Stallion. Come on, baby, I know you can do it." It was odd that the aroma of my favorite coffee filling the house didn't interrupt their activities. Usually, when I brewed coffee, my wife, Audrey, would rush downstairs even before it was ready. However, Audrey seemed quite preoccupied, which might explain why she hadn't noticed the coffee aroma yet. There were more words exchanged between them. She asked him to tell her how much better he was than her spineless husband, and he replied, "Oh my God, you're so much better." I considered engaging the safety on my weapon, deciding it was a cautious move just in case. After all, her boyfriend was a cop. How did I know that? Because when I arrived home early, his uniform and gear belt were scattered across my living room floor along with all of my wife's clothes. Amidst their passionate exchange, their words were clear. "That's it, baby, do it for me, harder. I've never felt anything like this until you came along. And thank God you did." The constant creaking of the bed and rhythmic thumping of the headboard against the wall made it difficult for me to focus on my task at hand. I couldn't be certain how much time I had, but judging by the duration of their activities in what used to be my bedroom, a place I had no intention of entering again, It seemed I had ample time. It was evident to me that this was not their first encounter, as I overheard my wife expressing a desire for increased frequency. Damn it. Baby, we need to find a way to meet 2 or 3 times a week instead of just occasionally. This sentiment came from my beloved wife, or at least I believe that's what she said. How did I end up in the middle of this nightmare? It was really foolish. I went to work and forgot my briefcase. No, I actually left it in the garage because I placed it there to rescue the cat from under the hood of my car and forgot about the briefcase. Tabby was our second cat. One cold winter morning many years ago, I forgot to tap on the hood before starting the car, and that was the end of Clarence, our first cat. There's nothing like the sound a cat makes when it gets caught in a fan belt spinning at about 1,000 revolutions per minute, not to mention all that fur flying around. Clarence wasn't clever enough, and apparently neither was I. You're never going to let that weakling you call your husband touch you again. No, he'll never touch me again, I swear. My briefcase wasn't that important, so I was just going to leave it behind. But I had to visit a client who drove me straight to my house. Anyway, I turned onto my street and immediately saw a black and white police car parked out front. I felt like someone had stabbed me in the heart. I assumed something terrible had happened to my devoted wife. I pulled into the driveway, nearly hitting my wife's brand new silver Lexus LS sedan. Her plaster garden gnome wasn't so lucky. I didn't even close the door and ran into the house. That's how I ended up here drinking coffee. Take me now, stud. Make me feel good. God, I've never felt anything so good. It was very unpleasant, and instead of coffee, I really wanted whiskey, but I figured I'd still need a clear head. I had to admit that their passionate screams were very disturbing, and seeing it was even worse, but I had to see it, if only to get the necessary video and audio. Honestly, seeing them tumbling around in my bed wasn't the most disturbing part. The most unpleasant part was the verbal humiliation my wife heaped upon me. God, you're so much better than Evan. Give it to me, baby, all of it. Apparently, this really spurred her lover on because the whole house started shaking along with the bed, and his swearing and grunting went up a few decibels. Let me tell you, it is a shock when your wife sleeps with her lover in your marital bed, and yes, they did it on my side. My wife was breathlessly riding him, cowboy style, and telling her lover how much it turned her on. That's when I ran to the bathroom, bent over the toilet, and threw up my breakfast. I was surprised they didn't hear or smell it either. I guess they were deeply focused on their activities. A part of me found it hard to believe, even after witnessing and hearing enough to convince a jury about what was happening, but my wife was 50 years old, and the guy she was sleeping with couldn't have been more than 30. He was in excellent shape, and my wife wasn't much of a match for him. I might not be a nacho man, but come on. Why go for someone else's wife who's in shape? It just doesn't make sense. It seemed to drag on forever, but after about 90 minutes, it suddenly got very quiet. I guess they must have taken a break. Then I heard my wife asking, "What's that smell?" Her boyfriend didn't respond. I just heard her exclaim, "Oh my God." There was a lot of commotion, opening and closing closet doors, dresser drawers, and laundry baskets. I assumed they were cleaning up any evidence of their affair. I made a mental note to get tested for venereal diseases. They saw me at the same time, and Audrey gasped, because, well, there I was, and her lover did the same. He glanced at his uniform and seemed dejected. "It's not there, stud." "What?" "Your service arm. Your boss took it with him when he left." Thoughtful guy. He almost started to disappear right in front of my eyes, and then I saw his lips quiver in desperation. He dropped to his knees, losing the sheet in the process, frantically searching through the pile on the floor. He took this too. I think he called it your throwing arm. I guess what really upset him was the fact that the serial number had been removed. That's like 5 to 7 years right there. Former officer Stud Johnson looked crushed by this revelation. Like I said, he's a thoughtful guy. We had a nice chat while you two lovebirds were busy upstairs. Audrey quickly glanced out the window toward the street. Yes, he took the patrol car as well. Your boss mentioned you were providing security at the construction site. He was going to take your uniform too, but he figured you might need it when you leave here. But where was I? You could call your wife for a ride home, but probably not. She was too upset about that video I emailed to her. It was hard to understand what she was saying, but it had something to do with her father, who was the chief of police. Or how could you do that to your kids? She told me about them. You seem to have a nice family. Despite the situation, I was kind of enjoying myself at this point. It was like having a fish on a line, and I was just reeling it in. I'd asked my wife to drive you, but her car's been impounded. What? Audrey's? She let out a high-pitched squeal. The police impounded your car, Audrey, because there were a couple of ounces of unaccounted for marijuana in the front seat. Sergeant Mark said they usually just write a ticket if they do anything at all, but he felt they owed me something for all the trouble the police department caused me. Don't worry, he said. You can probably pick up the car in a few days after they've done all their forensics. Oh my God. At this point, she wasn't screaming. It was more like a sad moan, similar to a lonely hound howling at the moon. "Well, officer, I think it's time for you to put on your uniform and leave." So he did. After he left, my wife finally regained her speech. "Please, Ev, I love you. It didn't mean anything at all. It was just a fling or something like that." "Oh man, I wish you'd told me that sooner. I was worried you loved him and were going to divorce me. Now I feel bad I overreacted, didn't I? You know I love you. Of course I love you, Evan. Why would you doubt that?" "Well, besides the whole infidelity thing, making love to your lover on my side of the bed, and calling me a stupid idiot covered in crayon, there were a few other signs." "Oh, honey, I never actually did that. It was just bedroom talk to get us in the mood." "Wait, you said you overreacted, Evan. Or what did you do?" She looked annoyed. "Evan, what did you do?" Up until now, she seemed to be in shock, but now she was clearly nervous and paying close attention. "Well, I'm sorry, but just when I thought you didn't love me anymore, I sent the video to our kids. I just wanted them to see who their new daddy would be. You might have to wait a little while before you call them. They seemed upset for some reason. I thought they'd be happy for you. Well, that's what I did." "Oh my God, you didn't." I just nodded. "I forgot to mention one more thing, but you probably already know that your lover's wife works for the same company as you. I think she mentioned that she works as an executive assistant to the CEO. Don't worry, I told her not to fire you because you'll still need your job, even if you get transferred to Little Rock. When I talked to my attorney, she said that since you make more money than I do, you'll be paying me child support for a few years. She thinks it will be around $3,000 a month. I know most cheating husbands refuse to accept this, the macho type, but that won't be me. I plan to take some time off from work and go on a long fishing vacation to cope with my pain, just like the song goes. Deep sea señorita fishing in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm not exactly sure why the lawyer requested a picture of you. She mentioned something about giving it to your father, but perhaps it was to have it on hand in case any officers wanted to engage in bad things. Or maybe it was to see if anyone else was interested in dating you. Nonetheless, I provided her with a photo. I also shared a copy of the video with your mom and dad and all your colleagues. Why were you so harsh, Evan? Well, honey, I wasn't trying to be harsh. I just wanted everyone to know who your new partner is. Your friends on Facebook appeared to be happy for you. At this point, Audrey had almost shut down. She sat on the floor wrapped in her sheets, crying, shaking her head and murmuring, "This can't be happening to me." "All right, dear, it's time to get dressed and prepare your bag. Your parents should arrive soon to pick you up." "Or pick me up?" "Well, of course, you'll need a place to stay. The house will have to be sold as part of the divorce." I told her later, "Divorce? You seem to have some questions, dear. That surprises me. What did you expect would happen when I found out?" "Well, you didn't. Anticipate getting caught? Should we keep having this pointless conversation?" For a few minutes it was quiet upstairs. She didn't utter a word aside from the occasional wee and sob. Why is it that cheaters always cry when they get caught? It's a terrible thing. If getting caught is so unpleasant, then please don't cheat in the first place. About 10 minutes later, she came downstairs dressed, but without her suitcase. "Evan, honey, we're really." Then I heard the car of her parents pulling up in front of our house. "Farewell, Audrey." As always, I held the door open for her, being a gentleman. All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned, and let's dive in. That evening didn't go as expected. The house was eerily quiet, and I couldn't find my wife, Helen, or our kids. Helen and I, Mike Lewis, have been married for 11 years. When I realized the silence, I noticed a note on the table. "Mike, I'm sorry. I can't tell you this in person, but I'm too much of a coward to face you. I met someone else and fell in love. The kids are with me and safe. The divorce papers are in the envelope under this note. As you can see, I'm not asking for anything. Helen." Naturally, my day and my life took a nosedive within moments. I was pacing around the kitchen, swearing, going through the divorce papers, and finally slumping into a chair. Helen was leaving me the house and all our money, taking only clothes for herself and the kids, along with their toys. The most infuriating part was the last demand. Helen wanted me to sign adoption papers for my kids, allowing her new partner to adopt them. It felt like a done deal. At least I now knew who she left me for, Henry Carslake. I decided to call my soon-to-be ex-wife. I greeted her with a curt, "Hey, Helen." She replied with a simple, "Hi, Mike." I proceeded to inquire about her situation, asking, "What's happening?" Helen explained that she had met someone else and fallen in love with him, as she had mentioned in her note. I responded skeptically, expressing my doubts. "Yeah, of course you did. No one just leaves a marriage and sleeps with a guy. I just hope it wasn't in our bed." Helen requested that I refrain from swearing and act civilized. After taking a shower and changing my clothes, I went out to eat since cooking wasn't appealing in my mood. The food was decent, so I decided to head to a bar and have a couple of drinks. After the day I had endured, I felt like I was owed that much. The man Helen left me for was the owner of Carslake Construction Company. I had done some work for his company in the past, but that was about to change. My friend Paul spotted me at the bar and commented on my rare appearance, asking if I had managed to get away from my family for the evening. I replied that it was something like that, and explained that I had returned to an empty house with a packet of divorce papers. Paul expressed his surprise upon learning that Helen was divorcing me, and commented that he didn't see it coming. I echoed his sentiment, saying that I was equally taken aback by the turn of events. I mentioned that she had moved in with Henry Carslake, and Paul was astonished, asking if it was the same Henry of Carslake Construction. I confirmed that it was indeed the same person and shared my suspicion that she was in love with him. Paul inquired about my plans, and I declared that I was going to give her a divorce since she didn't want anything from me. I explained that there was another form she wanted me to sign, but I had already discarded it. Curious, Paul asked about the nature of that form, and I explained that she wanted me to give the kids to him for adoption, emphasizing that it was not going to happen. Paul shook his head in disgust and made a remark about Carslake, to which I added defiantly that I had been scheduled to start working for him on Monday, but had decided to find another job instead. In the end, I signed the divorce papers despite Helen's attempts to persuade me otherwise, and she eventually gave up. When the divorce was finalized, Chloe was 10 and Lee was 8. I wanted to get back at Carslake, but I didn't want to land in jail for it. I never showed up for work on Monday, and strangely, no one seemed to press me about it. Part of my revenge on Carslake occurred without my involvement. It stemmed from my conversation with Paul. Word got out, and most local contractors refused to work with Carslake Construction. They saw how he had treated me, so they refused his projects. While Henry found other contractors, they were subpar, and the work quality suffered. After 6 months, my divorce became official. 3 months later, Helen and Henry got married. I took care of the kids for a week while they went on their honeymoon. I didn't do it to help them. I just figured a week was better than the limited time I had on weekends. What bothered me was my daughter Chloe's question. "Daddy, why did you send us to live with Mom and Henry?" "What? I didn't send you. Your mother took you because she doesn't love me anymore. If it was up to me, you could have stayed here." I responded, clarifying that it wasn't my choice and that I planned to discuss it with Helen. When Helen arrived to pick up the kids, she seemed tanned and cheerful. I told Helen to stop lying and urged her to tell the kids the truth. I warned her that if she didn't, I would. I mentioned that the kids knew I didn't ask her to take them and that I'd fight for custody if I could. Helen walked away in frustration. Life as a single man felt strange after being married for so long. Some friends tried to set me up on dates, but I didn't feel like dating. I wanted love, but wasn't in the mood for dating. Little did I know that my life was about to change. My neighbors were Gary and Emily, who had moved in just after Helen left. Their house was a good deal for them, but needed a lot of work. Emily worked as a secretary, and Gary was a retired Army. Man. We got along well, and they seemed like a nice couple. Whenever we crossed paths, we had friendly conversations. Tragedy struck when Gary had a sudden health crisis at work. Paramedics and a doctor arrived quickly, but Gary was pronounced dead at the scene. The autopsy revealed he had died from a subdural hematoma. Emily was left in distress and alone. I offered her my sympathy, and since her parents were on vacation, I walked her home and poured us drinks. I listened to her as she sobbed and shared her future plans. Emily cried and fell asleep on my couch. I covered her with a blanket and slept in a chair in case she woke up during the night. The next morning, as Emily was leaving, Helen was dropping off the kids. "Good to see you're not wasting any time, Mike." "Come on, Helen. The poor woman just lost her husband." Helen glanced at me, then turned to talk to the kids. Later that day, I explained to them why Emily was leaving the house. Chloe seemed sad, and I don't think Lee fully understood. Emily later invited me to attend Gary's funeral, which I did. Thankfully, in the UK, mortgages are insured, so Emily wouldn't be left destitute. This was little comfort given her loss. Emily's parents returned from Europe and spoke to me after the funeral. I assured them that I would look out for Emily since, apart from my CO workers, I was her only friend. I offered to help with minor household tasks to keep her place in a livable condition. The next time Helen picked up the kids, she remained in the car, which was fine with me since I had no desire to talk to her. Emily and I spent a fair amount of time together, not as a couple, but as friends supporting each other. About a year later, I heard Lee chatting with Emily in the garden. I called out to him, asking him not to be a pest, but Emily said it was okay as she hung laundry on the clothesline. I suggested to Emily if she would like to have dinner with us that night. Lee wanted Emily to join us, and we all shared a laugh. After dinner, Emily helped me prepare dinner, and it was clear she was skilled in the kitchen. After dinner, she assisted with the cleanup and sat with us for a while before heading home. I thanked Emily for dinner and for accepting the invitation. As she left, Chloe asked me with a smile if Emily was my girlfriend. I replied to Chloe that Emily was just a friend and neighbor, though secretly I thought it would be nice if she were my girlfriend. I kept that to myself, away from the kids. On a Sunday afternoon, Helen picked up the kids. I knew they would tell her about Emily joining us for dinner, and I was right. The next time Helen came to get the kids, she was particularly interested in Emily. I told that Emily was just a friend, and that what I did was none of her business. Helen mentioned that she didn't get everything she wanted. I retorted that she left me for a life of luxury with him, and that he could have his own kids if he wanted them. I expressed my strong opposition to him adopting our children, emphasizing how he had taken my wife and ruined our marriage. Helen pouted and walked home, but I smiled, knowing I had upset her. A year later, I hadn't seen Emily for a few weeks, partly because I was very busy. My friend Paul was rewiring a house for a young couple and asked me to make an offer on a complete plumbing rewire. My offer was accepted, and I had a busy few weeks getting everything finished. While working on the house with Paul, he kept me up to date with news about Carslake. He still had to use a lot of non-local professionals since most of the local guys refused to work for him. With the work on the house completed, I finally had some time to relax. I decided to take Emily out to dinner. She agreed, and we set a time for Saturday night. When I walked in behind Emily, it took my breath away. She was a petite woman with a pixie-cut hairstyle. The dress she wore accentuated her slim figure, and for the first time, I started to feel attracted to her. Dinner went well, and we spent a lot of time discussing our lives. Later that evening, I walked Emily to her door, and she expressed her gratitude for a wonderful evening. I smiled in response, and before I could reply, she surprised me with a passionate kiss that left me breathless. Afterward, she suggested that we go out again to see where things might lead and bid me good night, kissing me on the cheek this time. We did go out again, and this time it led to us spending the night together. Despite her small stature, Emily was incredibly passionate, and it was a thoroughly satisfying experience. As Emily and I spent more time together, she eventually sold her house and moved in with me. The kids were pleased with my dating life, and it was clear that they would inform Helen, who wasn't thrilled about it. She didn't want me, but Emily did. A year after our first intimate encounter, Emily and I got married. When the kids informed Helen, she simply snorted and turned away. Emily and I went on to have 2 children of our own, Gary and Robert. My older children were now old enough to visit on their own, which reduced my contact with Helen. Years passed, and one day, Chloe announced her engagement. Her boyfriend, Josh, had proposed the night before. As her father, I offered to help with the wedding expenses. Chloe explained that they initially thought they wouldn't need financial assistance, but Henry had offered to cover the costs with the condition that he would walk her down the aisle. Chloe refused, and Henry withdrew his financial support, leaving her upset. I was frustrated with Carslake for his actions, and Emily suggested using the money from the sale of her house to cover the expenses. I hesitated, considering it was her money, but she insisted and encouraged me to inform Chloe that we would cover the costs. Chloe was overjoyed when I shared the news, and we established a budget that accommodated everything they wanted for the wedding while staying under budget. The following day, Chloe informed me that Henry was furious, and Helen was clearly unhappy. One afternoon, Lee showed up unannounced in our garden, wanting to leave home because he was tired of hearing his mother and Henry argue. Emily asked if they were still arguing about the wedding, but Lee revealed it was something else. He mentioned overhearing their intimate moments and suggested that Henry wasn't performing well in bed. We shared a laugh about the situation, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction that Helen had left me for someone who couldn't fulfill his responsibilities when it mattered. Lee decided to stay the night at our house to avoid any conflicts at home. On Chloe and Josh's wedding day, Helen didn't seem pleased. Chloe told her that she and Henry would sit behind Emily and me during the ceremony. The church service went smoothly. I agreed to have Helen sit at the top table at the reception. Meanwhile, Henry sat with Emily, Robert, Gary, and Lee. After all the speeches, the caterers removed a few tables to make space for dancing. Josh and Chloe led the first dance, and Emily and I joined them, along with Helen and Henry. Later, we found ourselves at the bar, and Gary and Robert were sitting with one of Chloe's bridesmaids and her children. Lee asked Emily if she wanted to dance, and I encouraged him to go for it. Helen took the opportunity to approach me, clearly having had a few drinks, and I had a sense that this encounter might not end well. She began commenting on Emily and me, remarking how young Emily looked and how she hadn't aged despite being the mother of 2 boys. Helen then went on to criticize Emily's appearance, mentioning her weight and attire. I reminded her that we were divorced, and she no longer had the right to comment on my life. Helen continued to make derogatory remarks about Emily, and I defended my wife, telling Helen that Emily was more of a woman than she ever was. I even hinted at my satisfying intimate life with Emily. Helen was left stunned as Henry joined the conversation. I pointed out to Helen that when she left me, she thought she was trading up for something better, and maybe she was or wasn't, but I had moved on. I had my own life, a loving wife, and 4 wonderful children. I walked away, leaving Helen and Henry to their own devices. Emily and I danced to slow music, and as we danced, she asked me about the exchange at the bar. I told her to kiss me, promising to explain later. We shared a kiss, knowing that Helen was watching. After breaking the kiss, I smiled at Helen, who turned away to order another drink. As I looked at Emily, I couldn't help but think that I had indeed traded up for something better in my life.
Story 3.
My wife married my wealthy friend after my business failed. She returned a year later with bruises. Hello everyone, I'm a 36-year-old male. My ex-wife Avery, 29 female, and I were married for only 3 years before everything went south for me and she revealed her true colors. Avery and I dated for a year and 4 months before we got married. Soon after we started dating, I told Avery I was aspiring to set up my own business. So, I labored day and night and did a part-time job besides my actual job. I used the money from my day job to pay for my rent, bills, and groceries while using money from my part-time job to push into my business. Avery worked at a retail store as a sales manager, and I thought she had a fair idea of how to run a business. At the beginning of our relationship, Avery was very supportive. She even pushed me to work harder to expand the business. But after we married, she didn't seem very interested in the business anymore. She would even jokingly tell me to focus on other things that were important if the business was not going the way I wanted. But I was adamant because it was my dream, and I knew it was possible to make it happen. Fast forward to the first year of marriage. After several meetings and much persuasion, I got a big break when one of my wealthy friends volunteered to invest in my business. Avery and I were over the moon, celebrating our win. She pretended she believed in me and continuously pushed me to get things done. My business was a small logistics company, which I had been nursing this dream for a long time. I believed with proper management and funds, my logistics company would become one of the biggest companies in our state. With the funding, I purchased more delivery bikes, bicycles, and a truck for moving things. With more bikes and bicycles added to what we already had, business boomed, and our earnings increased. I also invested some money in marketing and signage, which paid off. However, I found a significant change in Avery's mindset soon after I got the investment. Before that money came in, Avery and I had no major reason to fight. Even if we argued about something or disagreed on something, we always settled it before we went to bed. But after the funding came, Avery and I fought most days, and the reason was money. She argued because she wanted me to give her some money for shopping, move us into a bigger apartment, and go for a week's vacation, all with the money that was meant to be invested in my business. When I kicked against the idea, she was mad. I understood the shopping aspect and even promised to give her money to buy a beautiful Chanel bag she had admired, but she wanted more. She claimed she was happy with the investment because she thought she would benefit from it. I was shocked at her demands because she knew how my business had been struggling and how hard I had worked and prayed for a financial miracle every day. When it came, I wasn't expecting her to make such demands, not at that time. Even if I were to take her shopping, move into a bigger apartment, or take her on vacation, it would have been from the profit I made from my business in the long run, rather than from the money I was supposed to invest and grow it. Countless times I told her the money was not for our personal use. It was meant to be returned with interest to my investor friend. But everything I said fell on deaf ears, and she wouldn't stop nagging about it. She started calling me selfish and said I was trying to take all the money my friend gave me for myself, even when I didn't work for it. When her words did not get to me as she expected, she switched to the emotional aspect and would cry all night. For that whole week, we argued, and when I couldn't take it anymore, I agreed to take her shopping on a budget for peace to reign. Then I invested the rest of the money in my business. I did that for Avery because I loved her, even when she was insensitive. As I mentioned earlier, with the addition of bikes and bicycles for delivery, business boomed, and we could cover more areas than we did in the past. It even reached the point where I had to resign from my main and side jobs to focus more on my business. I did everything possible to make sure it moved to the next level, and the money I earned monthly was enough to pay my share of the rent and bills and use whatever was left to pay for the loans I owed. About 2 months after my business started improving, Avery stopped contributing to the house, She claimed I was now doing well financially, and I could cater to the house like a man. She said she was tired of splitting 50/50ths with me when I earned more than double her monthly salary. Initially, when she mentioned it, I thought it was a joke, but when she refused to contribute to rent or other bills that month, I realized she wasn't joking. I tried to explain to her that it was not wise for me to take up the whole financial burden of the house because it would pull me backward instead of moving forward, but she refused to listen. Besides, I had to return the investment money to my friend too, with a hefty interest. She told me she had friends whose husbands were not earning as much as I did, but they cared for their wives, kids, and family independently. So why couldn't I do the same thing? This question was a slap in my face, but I didn't let it get to me. At that point, I was tired of constantly arguing with Avery. It was almost like she changed as soon as the money came. And with my business barely flourishing like I would have wanted, I started paying all the bills at home. I single-handedly paid for rent, all the bills, bought groceries, and paid for gas every month. I'd be lying if I said doing all that did not affect my business, because it did. I hated the way Avery kept acting like the business was mine alone. My primary reason for opening a business was that I didn't want to be doing a 9-to-5 with overtime for the rest of my life, and I didn't want that for Avery. Everything I did was so we could have a good life and possibly give our children the kind of lives we never had. But the more Avery came up with her demands and expectations, the more I felt that she was not interested in my business in any way. I married her because I believed she had a flair for business, and we were on the same page. She used to tell me how she would love us to own multiple businesses together across the country and even around the world. But when the time came for us to grow the only business we had together, she changed into a totally different person. She stopped contributing to the house and preferred to use the money she earned to shop for clothes, shoes, wigs, and whatever she wanted while I took care of the bills. For another year and some months, I tolerated her and tried to grow my business. Sometimes she would take my credit card for shopping with her girlfriends and max it out. So you can imagine what I was going through financially. It was more of a 1 step forward and 3 steps backward for my business, and for a few months it continued like that. Unfortunately, I couldn't continue because I had to pay back the money with interest, and I ran into serious debt issues and had to fold up for a while. It became so bad that I had to sell all my bikes, my personal car, and family jewelry heirlooms to settle the debt. And at the end of it, I was left with nothing, not even a penny saved. When this happened, I went through hell in Avery's hands. When I folded up my business, she began to say terrible things to me. She said something about how we would have used the money from the funding to live good lives, but because of my greediness, I lost everything. As if her bad-mouthing and verbal lashings were not enough, she changed completely. Earlier, we used to split the household chores. But when my business tanked, she told me to do my laundry, cook my own meals, and clean the house since I was home, apparently jobless. She literally used every opportunity she had to rub it in my face that she was making money while I was unemployed. Without a business, I was aggressively applying for jobs so that I could cover my expenses. After suffering such a huge loss, business was the last thing on my mind. Survival was first. Around that time, I noticed she was always smiling and typing on her phone. Then she came home with expensive gifts like bags, jewelry, shoes, and clothes. I knew she could not afford them because her salary could not buy even one bag, and she would have to save her salary for at least 4 months to get one of those expensive bags. As soon as I noticed her new pattern of coming home late with expensive things every week, I questioned her about it. And each time I did, she would abuse me and remind me that I didn't have the right to question her because I was jobless and would never be able to buy those things for her. With her new attitude, I knew we wouldn't get intimate, and that's what happened. She stopped sleeping in the bedroom because she knew I would try to touch her. And just like that, our marriage became a nightmare in the twinkle of an eye. I think 2 or 3 months after she started coming home with expensive stuff, it was hurtful and suffocating for me to tolerate her tantrums. But at that point, my priority was getting a job as soon as possible. However, one evening she came home and told me she wanted a divorce. She said she could no longer tolerate being married to me, and she revealed that she married me because she thought I had a promising future, but so far, she wasn't impressed. I didn't try to beg or convince her. I kind of knew that it was coming. I was already tired of everything and believed divorcing each other was the right thing to do. Even though I loved her, I could not live or remain married to a woman who mocked me, insulted me, and made me feel worthless at the slightest opportunity she had. So I signed the papers. She moved out of the house before our divorce was finalized. Shortly after we divorced, I was at home thinking about my life when she sent a message on Facebook. When I opened it, it was a picture of her in a bikini on a yacht with my rich friend. He was the same rich friend that funded my business. I couldn't have felt more betrayed at that point. Everything made sense. Expensive gifts, perfumes, her returning home late, the new attitude, and finally wanting a divorce. I couldn't even cry because what she had done passed the stage of expressing my heartbreak in tears. I even felt bad for her because my rich friend had a track record of using women, and he was divorced 4 times. In response to the picture she sent to mock me, I typed, "Enjoy it while it still lasts," and then blocked her. Moving on was difficult, especially with no job and no one to support me financially and emotionally. It was so rough, and there were days I thought of ending things because I was mentally in a very dark place. I even moved in with my younger brother because I could not afford to pay rent or take care of my basic needs. Some of my friends tried to support and help me occasionally. 4 months after Avery left me, I got a job. The pay was not that great compared to my previous job, but it was a motivating start for me. I worked really hard, did overtime, and I was able to split rent and bills with my brother for 2 months before I got my place. At my new workplace, a senior colleague of mine was particularly fond of me. Her name was Crystal, 47 female. She was obviously older, and I didn't understand why she would bring me lunch, ask if we could go out and eat together, and so on until I asked her. Crystal said I reminded her of her late brother who passed away when he was younger, and for some weird reason, I looked and walked like him. Down the line, Crystal and I became so close. When I told her about my past and the business that crashed, she promised to help. In the few months of knowing each other, I had already fallen in love with her. She cared for me and treated me with so much love. I didn't even get that kind of care and love in the 3 years I married Avery. With Crystal, I felt pampered, and I didn't even know when my heart gave way to love again. Surprisingly, help came. Crystal helped me as promised, and I got funding from someone she introduced me to. The person helped because she owed Crystal a favor. On her end, Crystal also gave me a mind-blowing amount of money to invest, with the agreement that I would pay her back monthly. She also shared ideas to push my business forward, expand, and offer something my competitors didn't. I know it all sounds too good to be true, and that's exactly how I felt. In the space of 9 months after Avery left me, in fact, if anyone had told me I would bounce back so fast, I would not have believed it. My only disappointment was that Crystal did not see me the way I saw her. She saw me as her brother, whom she loved so much, and she promised to keep supporting me as far as I kept to my end of the deal. She was almost 11 years older than me, and I would not have minded it when Crystal said no to me because she didn't want to mix business with pleasure. I was hurt a bit, but I got over it and decided to focus on growing back my business. Even though it was almost like starting from scratch because I sold my bikes, I didn't mind. Having a logistics business was something I really wanted, and I was passionate about it. With determination and the funds provided, my business kicked back to life, and I was so happy. Just 3 weeks ago, a year after Avery and I divorced, I received a call from Avery. She said she wanted to see me. I thought she must have heard about my new success and wanted to see things for herself, so I agreed to see her. I invited her to my company's location so she could see things for herself. I did this to rub it in her face. When she came, she looked so lean and didn't give the vibes of a rich man's wife. Deep down, I wanted to ask if everything was okay, but I didn't. My sole purpose was to show her I was doing well, even better than the last time. I'm sure she got the message. Now, that isn't the problem. The problem is that she called me again yesterday and asked if I could take her back because she was going through so much at the hands of her new husband. I'm so sorry your dream business tanked because of her lack of respect and complete selfishness, OPE. It's gross to think that she was only pretending to be supportive of you and your dreams. And it's honestly a bit shocking that the wealthy friend of yours decided to entertain her. And for her to send you the photo just to rub it in your face? That's evil. You're far too nice of a person. She flies through. Men like crazy. She's looking for a low-hanging fruit, anyone that can help her afford the brand-name purse or the all-inclusive trip. She's a lazy, good-for-nothing person and hungry for anything that's shiny and new. As for your business, I'm glad you're able to have someone in your life who wholeheartedly believes in you. Continue to focus on your business. This is your baby now. Don't let anything get in your way, and try not to get distracted by the opposite sex. Update 1. Thank you everyone for your comments. I'll answer some of the common questions asked in my original post. First, no, I don't have any intentions of taking her back. I only posted this here to get your opinions, which I have. Some of you asked if I knew Avery well enough before marrying her. The thing is, I believed I knew her, and while we dated, she never showed any of those attitudes. She never spoke rudely to me or mocked my business. When I said it was like the Avery I dated and the Avery I married were two different people, I wasn't bluffing. As someone has advised, I will be discarding her immediately because my business is now more important than anything else, and I cannot afford to make the same mistake twice. Meanwhile, I met with her 2 days ago. This time, her whole face was covered in bruises. She told me she regretted divorcing me because even when I had a little money, I was good to her and treated her like a queen, and she was sorry for leaving me. She said she wanted to leave her new husband because he was physically assaulting her, and she couldn't even sue him because he was filthy rich. She also feared what would become of her if he cut off everything she benefited from him. In addition to that, she admitted that she was jobless, and he didn't let her work because he provided everything she wanted, and it was choking her. She complained bitterly of his infidelity and how he would bring home different girls daily without minding her presence. From everything she said, I don't know how much of it was all true. All I can confirm is what I had seen on her body. I was sure she was physically, mentally, and emotionally in a bad place. On top of that, she looked sleep-deprived. And in our 1 year plus of dating and 3 years of marriage, I had never seen her look that terrible. As she talked, I couldn't help but notice how impeccable her timing was. It was evident that her abuse did not just start when my business came back to life. She must have been abused from her first month of being married to him, yet she never called or complained about it until the news of my business reached her. So, I decided to play with her as someone here had advised. I gave her all the reasons I could not take her back, and watched her beg and plead with me. She said she was deceived by what she saw and believed it was better to be a rich man's wife, even if he didn't love her, than to be a poor man's wife with all the love. But now, she had learned her lesson. When she had begged and begged, I told her to give me time to think about it. Hearing that gave her a ray of hope. I can't wait to kill her hope and make her go through the same pain I did. I'll make another update as soon as I take my revenge. Although it's sad to hear that she is in that state, you absolutely cannot go back to her. No one deserves to be physically abused. Unfortunately, in this case, she missed out on someone who would have truly cared for her. She just couldn't see past her own greed. Update 2. Hi everyone. Trust me, this is not ending as a love story because the story is already over. Believe me, I still cannot get over her betrayal, and no matter how hard I tried, I could not get the image of her face when she humiliated and abused me during my tough phase. It's pretty shameful that she tried to return to me after treating me like I'm worthless. Anyways, it's been a month now. I cannot begin to list everything she had done for me so that I could take her back. She even went as far as sharing her nudes at my request. And we had been consistently chatting from the day I told her I would think about it. It was almost like she delivered herself to me on a silver platter. All I needed was 1 month. She made it so easy. Throughout that month, she did literally everything I asked her to do. To even blow her mind and lead her on, I kissed her on the cheek, and she couldn't stop smiling and waving at me as she walked to her car that day. Someone here had commented that I set her up and ruined her miserable marriage, and I loved that idea. I deliberately asked her to send in her nudes to me because I knew she would. After all, desperate times require desperate measures. So, after I had enough of her explicit photos, I gathered chats between us as we discussed how she would divorce her husband and all the horrible things she had said about him. I unblocked my friend and sent him all those pictures and screenshots of our conversations. Then I left a message saying, "Helping you dodge a bullet, bro." I waited for him to see the message, and as soon as he did, I got a call from Avery. She was crying and breathing heavily on the phone, and when she could finally talk, She told me her husband threw her out of the house and seized everything he bought for her because, in his words, she came with nothing, so she had to go with nothing. After crying and deposing herself, she said she was coming to my place to be officially together like we had planned. I used that opportunity to tell her I was the one who sent everything to her husband, and that we could never be together because she didn't deserve any love. When she heard that, she cried more and begged me not to do that to her. I already did. I warned her not to show up at my place or company, or I would have her arrested. After that, I blocked her contact. I can only imagine the heartbreak she's going through right now. Very bold of her to think she could eat her cake and have it. I can't appreciate you all enough. Thank you so much for your advice and suggestions. I would not have paid her back so satisfyingly if you all didn't help me, thank you. But your friend is the one beating her. How is he the one dodging the bullet? I'm not sure you're right to say that here, OP. No one deserves to be treated that way, even though she did leave you. I'm not sure playing games with her like that makes you any better. At this point, it's best just to let sleeping dogs lie, OP. Move on and move up. What do you think? Should OP have done that? What do you make of OP's ex's situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you soon.
Story 4.
The internet changed how we lived. Suddenly, everyone wanted a computer, including my family. We finally got one a couple of years back. Initially, it was a novelty. My wife used it for email and games, while the kids used it for homework and gaming. I browsed the web and watched adult content. I often worked late, leaving the factory at midnight. Unlike many guys, I headed straight home. Alone in the quiet house, I'd sit at the computer. Eventually, I got bored and started reading stories online. I became intrigued by tales of infidelity. These stories made me suspicious of my wife. I started scrutinizing her behavior, even arguing with her. Despite her reassurances, I couldn't shake my doubts. I read less over time, but the thoughts lingered. I even wondered about my own reactions if I caught her cheating. Would it turn me on? Discussing this with Deb only led to more questions. Our relationship had begun innocently enough, but doubts crept in. Deb's sister Sandy had a reputation for promiscuity. Though I'd been wild in my youth too, Sandy's behavior was on another level. Her carnal exploits were well known, including involvement in ménage à trois. I knew Bob from work. He was a day shift supervisor who got transferred. He invited me to his wedding with Sandy, who was just as wild as him. I wasn't fond of Bob because of his behavior towards Deb. Despite Deb's reassurances, I made it clear I'd protect her from him. We agreed to keep our past relationships private due to jealousy. Our conflicting work schedules strained our marriage. I didn't want to encounter someone Deb had slept with, nor did I want to admit I'd been with her sister when our kids were young. Despite our differences, we managed to get along, though we didn't see each other much. Deb asked me to fix Sandy's leaking sink, knowing Bob was useless with repairs. I promised to take care of it on my way to work. While I worked, thoughts of Sandy's lifestyle as a possible wanton lingered, fueled by Bob's revelations. Despite Sandy's advances, I joked to keep things light. She didn't tempt me enough to risk my marriage. Arriving at Sandy's house, she greeted me provocatively. As I fixed the clog caused by eggshells and potato peels, Sandy hovered nearby, emphasizing her availability. "What are you doing, Sandy?" "I want you." "Stop it, Sandy. I'm trying to finish this job." She paused briefly, allowing me to complete the task. When I stood up, she persisted. "Are you going to sleep with me now?" "No, Sandy, I can't do that. Deb is your sister and I love her. I won't cheat on her, especially not with her sister." "Have you forgotten how it was in high school? Are you too good to sleep with me now?" "Sandy, please, I love Deb." "She doesn't know about our past together unless you tell her. You're a beautiful woman." "But I love Deb." "You foolish man. Either you'll sleep with me or I'll tell Deb you did it anyway. She'll believe me. After all, I'm her sister." "Why are you doing this? Why hurt us? Deb is your sister and she loves you." Sandy laughed. "My innocent sister thinks she's perfect. Let's see how she reacts when I spill the truth." "Sandy, don't do this. I won't have lovemaking with you. And I'll tell Deb about our past in school. I know she'll understand." Grabbing my tools, I declared I was finished with her sink. I left in my truck, my mind racing. Would Sandy lie to Deb? At work, I tried calling Deb, but she wasn't home. I left a message, expressing my love and the need to talk about her sister. The day dragged on, with my thoughts consumed by the impending conversation. By evening, I called home again, but no one answered. Deb had left with Sandy and Bob, leaving the kids with me. I decided to keep them overnight. "Is something wrong, Ray?" asked Deb's mom. "No, it's okay. If you see her, tell her I love her and I'll see her tonight. I have to get back to work." For me, it was one of the longest nights. I knew I had to confess about Sandy before I met Deb. Finally, my workday ended, and I headed home, bracing myself for the inevitable conversation. Pulling up to the house, I noticed Sandy's car parked in the driveway, signaling an imminent confrontation. Unlocking the door, I was met with a shocking sight. My wife, Deb, Bob, and Sandy in compromising positions. Anger surged through me as chaos erupted. Waking up in the hospital, I found Patrolman Gene Andrews by my side, explaining the events that had led to my injury. Confusion clouded my mind as I tried to make sense of the situation. "I see you're conscious now. I'm Patrolman Gene Andrews." "Where am I? And where's my wife? What happened?" "Take it easy, Mr. Harper. You have a concussion from a blow to the head with a glass vase. There was a fight at your home, and though charges were initially considered, they've been dropped. You're lucky. It could have meant 18 months in jail. What about the attack on me?" "Witnesses say you were in a scuffle with your brother-in-law when his wife intervened, hitting you with the vase to stop the fight. It was a single blow to halt the altercation. You should be grateful the charges were dismissed." "Where was my wife during all this?" "When we arrived, she was ill from excessive drinking, according to your sister-in-law. You became upset with her, leading to a confrontation with your son-in-law who was trying to protect her. Your wife doesn't recall much, only that there was shouting. If the charges are dropped, why are you here?" "My supervisor called when you weren't home yet and instructed me to wait for your statement." "So, what happened?" "I have nothing to say. I wasn't going to broadcast that I found my wife with another man. I just lay there and said nothing." "Okay, it's your call. The doctor says you'll need to stay until tomorrow. Consider yourself fortunate no charges were pressed. You're lucky, Mr. Harper." The officer departed, leaving me with a pounding headache. What now? I couldn't bear the thought of living with a cheating wife, but I needed answers. I phoned my sister to pick me up the next day. I couldn't rely on Debbie, not after this. As I waited for Amy to arrive, the phone rang. It was Deb. "Should I come get you? We need to talk now that we're square." "Square? What are you talking about? You cheated with Bob and you think we're even. Amy's on her way. I just want to grab my things and go." "What do you mean, leave? I was just evening the score for what you did," Deb retorted. "I'm not discussing this over the phone. Amy and I will come to pick up my things, and we can talk then." I hung up and waited for Amy. She arrived shortly, and we drove to my house. I asked her to wait in the car to avoid any conflict. Knocking on the door, Deb answered. I inquired about the kids, and she mentioned they were at her mom's. Beginning the conversation, I addressed her response to my message. "Did you listen to my voicemail?" "Yes." "Sandy claimed you coerced her into having lovemaking. How could you?" "I didn't do that. That's why I left the message. I went to fix her plumbing and she made advances. I refused, but she persisted, threatening to lie to you about us." "I don't believe you. She wouldn't lie to me. She's envious of our marriage and wanted to break us apart. Letting Bob sleep with you was part of their swinging lifestyle. They got what they wanted and our marriage suffered." "No, that's false. I did it for revenge. You assaulted my sister, so I slept with Bob to even the score. Sandy even knew physical engaging details about you, like your uncircumcised state and the mole on your upper thigh. Your sister is promiscuous. She knew because I was involved with her in high school, like many others. I kept it from you because I liked you and didn't want to jeopardize our relationship. Then you said we should bury our past. I'm unsure what to believe. Sandy is my sister, and you're my husband. Instead of asking me, you let Bob. Did you really think raping your sister would fix things? You must have wanted him badly to believe them. But Sandy's claims... I don't care what your sister says. It's not just about Bob, it's about you not trusting me enough to discuss the accusations. If I had assaulted her, why didn't she report it? She didn't want to cause a family scandal, but she had no qualms about involving the police last night. She didn't cry maltreatment because it didn't happen. You can believe whoever, but this marriage is over. Why would you want to be with a rapist? No, you desired Bob and used me as an excuse. That's not true. I love you. Look up, love. It doesn't involve sleeping with others. I'll grab my things now and see you next week for the rest. I'm consulting a lawyer Monday to start the divorce process. Ray, hold on. This isn't how it was planned. Sandy said she forgave you and you'd forgive me. I only wanted revenge. No, you slept with Bob. And your sister. I grabbed my suitcase, packing a few things. What about the kids? Tell them what you want. I'm done with this. I'll arrange visits through a lawyer and Amy can help with the kids. I don't want to speak to you again. I left. Amy drove me to a budget motel. On the way, I told her everything. She knew I was truthful. Weeks passed. It was tough. I worked extra for expenses, found a cheap place and ate out mostly. In the divorce, assets split equally. Child support didn't bother me. I love my kids. I miss Debbie, but know it's over. Attended school events, avoiding Debbie's family, saw my kids weekly. Deb called often. I listened about kids, but hung up when she brought up us. Visited Amy's for dinner and played with kids. Sandy stuck to her story, leaving Deb torn. I had no proof. It was my word against Sandy's. Deb believed her, which hurt the most. One afternoon, the school called saying Kyle wasn't well. I fetched him and found he had a cold. I informed Debbie, who taught middle school, and she said she'd come home soon. After checking Kyle's temperature, which was slightly elevated, I waited with him. An hour later, Debbie arrived. As she went to check on Kyle, the phone rang. Without thinking, I answered. It was Sandy. "What are you doing there?" she asked. "Well, look who's calling the shots. Kyle was sick, so I brought him home. Thanks for ruining our marriage." I recorded the conversation, forgetting the answering machine was on. "Is he okay?" "Why do you care? You're the reason his parents split." "Ray, things got out of hand. You knew we were wantons, and Bob wanted your wife. If you had just slept with me, none of this would have happened. But instead, you came home and started a fight. You accused me of maltreatment and made Bob assault Deb. What kind of sister are you?" "Bob didn't force her. She willingly slept with him, and she'd probably do it again. She was drunk, and you filled her head with lies, then watched your husband violate her. Ray, you can't prove anything. I warned you Deb would believe me. If you need action, call me. Tell Deb to ring me later. Hope Kyle feels better." She hung up and I turned off the recorder. Debbie asked who called, and I told her it was Sandy. "Your angel sister, who never lies to you," I replied. "What did she want?" I recorded her message. She said to call her back. "See you in court Thursday." "I guess it's our freedom day." "Don't forget to listen to the message," I said, heading to my truck. My phone rang persistently on the way home, about 10 times. When I finally answered, it was Debbie apologizing, claiming Sandy told her the truth about not being maltreatmented. "Good to know, but it doesn't change my mind. You slept with Bob without giving me a chance to explain. Despite telling you the truth, you chose your sister's tale, thinking I was a rapist. I loved you, maybe always will, but I also hate you for what you did to our family and the distrust you had for me." On Thursday, I took 2 days off work, signed the divorce petition at my attorney's office, and left before Deb arrived. Depressed, I went to the neighborhood bar where I saw Bob. Without hesitation, I punched him repeatedly until I was pulled away by others. Dragged off by the police, I was taken to jail. I made one call, reaching out to my sister Amy. I confessed my actions and insisted she shouldn't post bail. I'd face my sentence. Tears flowed when we hung up. Debbie tried to visit me in prison, but I declined to see her. Nearly 2 months later, my case went to court. I pleaded guilty to assault and received a 2-year sentence, minus time served. Amy stored my belongings, informing me that Debbie was unwell and wished to see me. I refused. Deb truly loves you. Her family is furious about Sandy's accusations. Also, Debbie never showed up to sign the divorce papers. So legally, you're still married, Amy informed me. Prison life was harsh, fights were routine, and I had to earn respect. My cellmate, Keeler, was a lifer with a violent past. Despite our rough start, he eventually opened up to me. Then, surprisingly, Debbie visited me one day. "What brings you here?" I questioned, feigning anger, though she looked lovely and tender. "Ray, I still love you. I've made mistakes," she confessed, offering me photos of our kids, tears streaming down her face. "I've moved on. Take care of our kids," I replied, receiving the pictures. "I didn't finalize the divorce. I'll wait for you no matter how long," she pleaded. I felt torn. Despite her mistakes, I still loved her. Leaving her by the window, I walked back to my cell. In the kitchen, I overheard plans to confront Keeler. Without being a snitch, I informed him, hoping to save a life. The next day, unsure if Keeler believed me, I stood my ground. He assured me he'd handle it discreetly, earning my gratitude. He concealed 2 books under his shirt, shielding his kidneys. Across from him, 3 allies sat at a nearby table. As the attacker approached and lunged with a knife, Keeler remained composed. The blade struck the books, its dullness preventing penetration. Keeler's comrades subdued the assailant until guards intervened. The attacker was isolated, while Keeler resumed his meal unfazed. It was astonishing how Keeler remained composed. He confided in me regularly after the incident. Despite his tough exterior, he was a different person behind bars. Keeler inquired about my family, sharing his own story of estrangement. His daughter Angie remained loyal, though he protected her from prison life. He cherished her deeply, proud of her career as a lawyer. I recounted my ordeal with Sandy and Debbie to Keeler. "Do you still love her?" he asked. "Yes, but I can't forgive her," I replied. Keeler urged me not to hold on to grudges, sharing his own regrets. His words left me pondering my future upon release. Without a job or family, what would I do? The following month, Debbie visited me again, her eyes teary but smiling. She handed me drawings from the kids, portraying us as a family. "They miss you, Ray, and I miss you terribly. Can you forgive me? Can we rebuild our family?" "I've cut ties with Sandy and Bob. I regret not trusting you," I confessed. Doubt lingered. Would she believe me if faced with accusations again? "Deb, I want to forgive you, but it's hard. Seeing you with Bob is etched in my mind. Did you have feelings for him?" "No, I despised it. I felt sick when you walked in. I regret my actions deeply. I only want you, Ray, the father of our children," she pleaded. Weeks later, Amy visited with unsettling news. "I saw Sandy and Bob together at the house. I don't know why. I thought you should know." Confusion swirled. Had Deb lied again? I was ready to forgive, but now doubted her honesty. I needed to understand why Deb was reconnecting with Susan and Bob. A month later, Keeler and I spoke, and he expressed gratitude for my past help. He, a former lawyer, offered to leverage his connections to potentially secure my release from parole. Though uncertain, I trusted him. Keeler's integrity stood firm, despite his criminal background. I respected his stature and refrained from probing further, choosing to accept his word. A few weeks later, I was summoned to the warden's office for the parole board meeting. The prison governor was the first to address me. "Mr. Harper, we have a parole application for you. After reviewing your file, we noted your initial struggle to adjust. Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir. I found prison life challenging, but I tried to adapt." "If released earlier, where would you have lived and worked?" I had to think quickly, realizing the importance of my response. "Well, sir, my sister and her husband offered me a place to stay, and my previous employer expressed willingness to rehire me." "Aren't you married, Mr. Harper?" "Yes, sir, but we were in the process of divorce when I was sentenced. I'm uncertain about our future." "We appreciate your candor. We knew about your marital status and wanted to gauge your honesty." "Regarding recidivism, we're cautious about early releases. I assure you I'm committed to staying out of prison." "Return to your cell, Mr. Harper. We'll notify you of our decision by month end." "Thank you, sir, for considering my parole." Back in the cell, Keeler inquired about the meeting. I shared my responses and asked if he had any involvement. "You never know, but if you're released early, I'll expect a weekly box of cigarettes on my account," he chuckled. A few days later, Debbie returned, mentioning a parole board representative had visited. "Are you getting paroled?" she inquired anxiously. "What did they say?" he nervously questioned. "They asked about our living arrangements, and if you'll be staying here," she replied, adding, "I'd love to have you back." Changing the subject, he queried about her interactions with Sandy and Bob. "She's my sister. I don't see her much," she responded defensively. "And Bob?" he pressed. "Why all the questions?" she retorted, visibly uneasy. "You promised not to see Sandy, yet they were here together. Did something happen with Bob again? Tell him when I'm out, I'll settle things. And if you're having fun with him in the meantime, I'll deal with it," he asserted. Deb hastily exited the room, confirming his suspicions. He phoned his sister Amy, informing her of the encounter, and she assured him of her support. "Did the parole board contact Mr. Parker about my job?" he inquired. "Yes, they did. He said you could return. You were one of his top employees," she reassured. "You've given me hope," he acknowledged gratefully. "They mentioned you're likely to be released next month. Considering you have a place to live and a job," she added tearfully. Amy's words buoyed his spirits. I received a call informing me of my upcoming release next week. They provided the name of the lawyer handling my case and instructed me to report to the agency promptly after my release. It puzzled me why I had to meet with a lawyer instead of a parole officer. However, I learned that the law firm facilitated my release, handling paperwork, explaining my parole terms and arranging a meeting with a parole officer. I expressed gratitude to Keeler, remembering our agreement about the cigarettes. Regardless of his involvement in my parole, the prospect of freedom was worth a weekly box of cigarettes. As I stepped outside the gate, my sister Amy awaited me tearfully. We shared a hug and a brotherly kiss. Inside Amy's house, her husband welcomed me warmly. Amy mentioned that Debbie, after consulting with a lawyer while I was incarcerated, had initiated the divorce proceedings. It seemed my suspicions about Deb were confirmed. Yet now, I was a free man. Knowing I needed to arrange visitation with my kids, I called Deb's house beforehand to ensure she was available. I clarified that I sought no trouble and suggested we discuss arrangements on her porch. Reluctantly, she agreed, warning of involving the police if there was any disturbance. As I arrived at the house, my children rushed to me, shouting, "Daddy! Daddy! You're back!" I embraced them tightly, feeling the depth of my longing for them. After a brief chat, I urged them to ride their bikes, recalling how their mother and I used to watch them from the porch. "Debbie, these kids are mine too. I want to be a part of their lives," I asserted, frustrated by her dismissive attitude. "I was willing to forgive you, but you went back to Bob and Sandy. I won't tolerate exposing my children to their lifestyle," I warned sternly, emphasizing the seriousness of my intent. Debbie insisted she wouldn't subject the kids to that lifestyle and claimed she had changed. "Actions speak louder than words," I reminded her skeptically. After bidding my kids farewell, I discussed their well-being and promised to spend more time with them once I found a nearby apartment. As I left, a sense of unease settled over me, knowing I needed legal guidance in this complex situation. I hadn't spoken to the lawyer who secured my parole. Approaching the receptionist, I presented the card from the parole board. "May I see Mr. A.J. Brady, please? I have an appointment. I'm Ray Harper," I stated. The receptionist assured me Brady would see me shortly and directed me to take a seat. While waiting, I wondered if she had said Miss Brady. The card indicated A.J. Brady, so I assumed it was a man. Lost in thought, I was taken aback when a stunning woman in a dark blue suit approached. She greeted me with a smile, dimples, and shoulder-length dark hair. As she extended her hand for a handshake, she introduced herself as A.J. Brady. "Ray Harper, I presume," she said. "I've been asked to review your case. From what I've gathered, you didn't receive fair representation. Let's discuss further in my office," she added, instructing the receptionist to hold calls. "Yes, Miss Brady," the receptionist responded. I followed her into her office. If she had asked, I would have followed her anywhere. She was strikingly beautiful. "Well, Mr. Harper, we finally meet," she said. "Please call me Ray," I replied gratefully. "I owe you my life, but I'm curious, why me?" "A friend of mine asked me to look into your case," she explained. "Your lawyer failed to mention key details like your recent divorce and extenuating circumstances. I presented these to the parole board, who agreed your sentence was excessive." "Why me, Miss Brady? Who hired you? Can I call you AJ?" I inquired. "Look, Ray, a friend asked for my help and I delivered. Knowing who hired me isn't crucial. And yes, you can call me AJ," she replied. "There are some things we need to discuss." "Would you join me for lunch?" I asked. "I don't usually meet clients outside the office," she replied. "It's not a date, just lunch," I clarified. "All right, Ray, let's call it a business meeting over lunch," she agreed, flashing a smile. "I'll let Mary know we're leaving, and then we can go." I watched her rise. She exuded a rare blend of charm and professionalism for a lawyer. We dined at a tranquil restaurant. Over lunch, she briefed me on meeting my parole officer, regular visits, adherence to rules, and staying clear of trouble. "Angie, share something about yourself," I requested. "Ray, discussing my personal life with a client wouldn't be appropriate," she responded. "Your smile is captivating," I complimented, prompting her blush. "Tell me about your legal background," I persisted. She revealed her scholarship-acquired law degree and experience in criminal law. As we ate, Angie lingered in my thoughts. "Will I see you again?" I inquired. "Return next week for paperwork with your parole officer." "We can have lunch then," she agreed, softening slightly. After lunch, we returned to the office. When she extended her hand, I held it briefly, pondering her thoughts. We bid farewell, and I eagerly anticipated our next lunch. Her secretary's smile hinted at the rarity of such interactions, a testament to Angie's uniqueness. I returned to work, swiftly completing tasks as if it were second nature. My colleagues seemed to regard me with newfound respect, and no one dared to challenge me. For 2 consecutive Mondays, I met with Angie, initially maintaining a professional relationship. However, by the 4th week, she informed me that our business collaboration had ceased. Are you still my lawyer? I inquired. Certainly. Call me if you encounter any issues, she assured. Angie, I regret to inform you that I must terminate our arrangement, I confessed. Terminate? After all I've done to assist you? She exclaimed. Yes. I desire more than a professional connection. I want to take you on a genuine date. Get to know you better, I expressed. Ray, I'm conflicted. There's an attraction, but what will people think? She pondered. I don't care about perceptions. Just join me once. If it doesn't feel right, we won't repeat it. Let's follow our hearts, I urged. After hesitation, she reluctantly agreed. I'll go, but don't expect anything more, she cautioned, surprised by her own words. Angie agreed, and on Saturday, we took a drive. I borrowed a car from my sister, opting not to use my old truck. Arriving at her townhouse, I was greeted by a stunning woman as she opened the door. Despite individual perceptions, to me, she appeared breathtaking. Resisting the urge to embrace her immediately, I reminded myself to act as a gentleman, though it wasn't easy. At a fancy restaurant, we enjoyed wine followed by dinner. Afterward, we conversed while listening to music. Angie, tell me about yourself. Where did you grow up? I noticed your last name differs from your father's, I inquired. You know my story, Ray. My parents' relationship was troubled, ending in my father's incarceration for the past 14 years. Raised by extended family, I, the youngest, was only 14 when it all unfolded. It was a difficult time. Despite loving him, my siblings couldn't forgive our father for his actions. I harbored guilt for revealing my mother's infidelity to him. Perhaps if I had stayed silent, things might have been different. Angie, you shouldn't blame yourself for your mom's decease or your dad's imprisonment. You were just a child trying to do the right thing, I reassured her. After my father was incarcerated, I resolved to attend college and pursue a career in law, hoping to assist him with a lighter sentence. That's why I specialized in criminal law. Despite my efforts, there wasn't much I could do for him, Angie explained. As for your question about my marital status, I wasn't married long, and it's not something I want to discuss, she replied with a smile. Ray, can we table this conversation for another time? I'm enjoying our evening together, and I'd rather not dwell on these topics. Would you like to dance? She suggested. I'm not much of a dancer, but I'd love to hold you close, I responded. As we danced, I embraced Angie, cherishing the moment. Ray, I have trust issues, especially with men due to my social circles. I'm just being upfront with you. If it weren't for my father's intervention, I might not have agreed to this date, Angie admitted. I'll make sure to send your father some extra cigarettes. Angie, you mean a lot to me, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust. If I overstep, just let me know, and I'll respect your boundaries, I promised. When I dropped her off that night, I kissed her at the door, leaving her in silence. She kissed me again and leaned back. Can I come in, Angie? Not today, Ray. It's too soon. Maybe next Saturday? That could work. Give me a call on Thursday. I returned home, filled with happiness. We got together the next 2 Saturdays. During our time together, she opened up more. Ray, I want you to know me better. If we're going to keep seeing each other, I won't hide anything. I've been married before, as I mentioned. It happened during my freshman year of college. My boyfriend and I thought we were in love, so we got married after I got pregnant. But we soon realized we were too young, and the marriage failed. I had a mishap, and we ended up divorcing. I kept the last name Brady to distance myself from my maiden name Miller, as my father insisted. I felt relieved that she trusted me with her story. She asked about my kids, expressing interest in meeting them. I had already told them about her, and my daughter was eager to meet her. Angie, would you like to join us? My sister is hosting a family barbecue next Saturday, and you're invited. It would mean a lot to me if you came. I knew it was a significant step for us. She avoided eye contact, indicating she understood the importance of this invitation. After a deep breath, she looked at me and kissed me passionately, a first for us. Pulling back, she took another breath. Okay, Ray, I'll come. What can I bring? I wasn't sure what women typically brought to these gatherings, so I suggested Amy could discuss it with her. When I informed Amy about Angie attending the party, the guest list expanded. Everyone wanted to meet her. My parents, cousins, aunts, and uncles all showed up. Angie offered to make potato salad. Amy mentioned how sweet Angie sounded on the phone, hinting at her hopes for our relationship. Every weekend, I visited Deb's house to pick up my kids. We'd either hang out at Amy's or do something fun together. I asked about their mother respectfully. Kyle mentioned she was dating a man, which concerned me initially. But Kayla reassured me. He was their school teacher named Pat. He'd lost his wife to leukemia and had moved to start anew. He had a daughter their age, whom Kyle and Kayla liked. "I need to tell you something, Deb. Your deceit and infidelity destroyed us. If you value this man, treat him right. Most importantly, be truthful with him. Don't repeat the same mistakes you made with us. Pat cares for our children and treats them well. He's aware of your existence and acknowledges you as their father. I hope things work out for us. I hope I haven't tarnished your future relationships. Ray, you're a decent man, and I believe you'll find the right partner. I'm just sorry for the pain I caused you." After bidding farewell, I drove home. I rented a small apartment about a mile from Deb and the kids. Opted for a 2-bedroom place so the kids have a spot when they're with me. I still swing by Amy's a couple times a week, usually for a meal, but I enjoy visiting them too. As the barbecue day arrived, I felt anxious. Waiting outside, I felt immense relief seeing Angie's car pull up. She greeted me with a smile, offering a bowl of potato salad. "Make sure to have some," she teased. She looked stunning. I couldn't see her any other way. Being with her made me feel elated. I realized I'd fallen for her, even though we'd only shared kisses. Some things you just know. I hoped she felt something for me too. Introducing her as my good friend, I watched as she mingled with everyone. Mom and Dad instantly took a liking to her. Dad even quipped, "Don't let her get away, Ray. We already adore her and we barely know her." Angie glanced at me and smiled. When I introduced her to Amy, their mutual glance seemed like positive reinforcement. "Ray, I never mentioned this, but I encountered your sister during the parole interviews. I didn't bring it up as it wasn't relevant until now. I never anticipated we'd become acquaintances. I assured you of my honesty, which is why I'm disclosing this now. Amy and I hadn't communicated since your parole until she contacted me about the potato salad. Have you conversed with anyone else I should be aware of?" "Yes, I've spoken to Deb, your ex-wife, Sue, and Bob, naturally. Additionally, I liaised with your employer to secure your position considering those involved in the bar incident and your arrest. I handled all of this as your legal representative." I never foresaw developing feelings for you, especially without meeting. I regret not divulging this earlier, but as your attorney, I needed to ascertain the truth before fully supporting you. If you want me to depart, please say so, and I'll oblige. "Leave, leave." All I heard was your declaration of love for me. I embraced her with a kiss, followed by a hug, and then introduced her to the rest of the family. I informed Angie I'd return shortly as I needed to pick up the kids, who were eager to meet her. Upon my return, Kayla approached and introduced herself to Angie. "Hi, I'm Kayla. Are you Daddy's girlfriend? You're really pretty."
Just like Daddy said. "Hi, Kayla. You can call me Angie or AJ. You're a very pretty girl, too. It's really nice to meet you," Kayla then said. "Come meet my older brother. He's 10 and a bit shy around girls. Kyle, this is AJ, Daddy's friend." I observed Kyle shaking Angie's hand. She knelt down to chat with the kids at their level. The way they interacted indicated they were likely to become friends. I joined them, and Kyle, not typically talkative,
Told me, "We like her, Daddy. She's so pretty and sweet." Angie simply glanced at me and smiled. The barbecue was fantastic as the evening progressed. While chatting with Angie, Kyle and Kayla approached us. "Dad, remember you mentioned going to the amusement park in 2 weeks? Can Angie come with us? That way, when Kayla and I ride the attractions, you'll have someone to talk to." I attempted to convey to Kyle that such inquiries should be made in private. Angie might have other commitments or might not enjoy amusement parks. He glanced at Angie and apologized to her. "Sorry, Angie. I didn't realize you weren't fond of amusement parks." Angie chuckled and knelt down, addressing Kyle. "Sweetheart, what your daddy means is that those questions are better asked to him privately, not me. As for amusement parks, I adore them and would love to go. If it's all right with your daddy, perhaps you and I can enjoy the roller coaster together." Sure enough, we all headed to the amusement park, where the kids eagerly rode every attraction. Angie kept her promise to Kyle and rode the roller coaster with him, as well as the Ferris wheel. On our way back, Kayla remarked, "Dad, you should get a car instead of your truck. Angie can't always use hers, we won't all fit in your truck." We chuckled at Kayla's observation, realizing she was correct. Over the following weeks, I didn't see much of Angie. Work kept me busy on weekends, and she had court obligations. Although we spoke on the phone occasionally, it wasn't the same. One Saturday, I picked up the kids, and we decided to visit Chuck E. Cheese's, a pizza place with various games and prizes. After arriving home, Kayla asked if she could invite Angie to join us. Not wanting to disappoint her, I agreed to call Angie. "Angie!" I called out. "Angie, it's Ray. Kayla wanted me to give you a call. Any plans for tonight?" "Oh, hey, Ray. I was going out with some friends." "Oh, okay. Have a great time." Ray, you mentioned Kayla wanted to talk to me. Can you put her on the line, please? It's all right, Angie. Sure, that'd be nice. Could you pass the phone to Kayla? I could only hear one side of the conversation. Hey, Angie, Dad's taking Kyle and me to Chuck E. Cheese's for pizza and games. We thought you might want to join us. Yeah, okay. I'll let him know we miss you too. All right, bye. I felt bad for Kayla. I'm sorry, honey, but Angie already has plans. What do you mean, Dad? She said she'd be here in half an hour. She mentioned she's getting a car, so she doesn't always have to use hers. Yeah, Daddy, she said she misses us. Later that evening, after we returned from a pizza party where the kids won a bunch of stuffed animals thanks to Angie's skills at the games, I dropped them off at their mom's house. Angie expressed her desire for us to get to know each other better. We headed to my apartment and settled on the couch. Angie, you know I care about you, right? I wouldn't be here if I didn't. I want to be engaged with you. I haven't trusted a man in a long time. All I ask is for you to be gentle and caring. I don't want to feel used. I want to feel loved. We began on the couch and eventually moved to the bedroom, indulging in whatever pleased us. I pampered her feet with massages, licked whipped cream off her stomach, and explored every sensation. We spent hours caressing, massaging, and expressing our love. Holding her in my arms after lovemaking was when I felt most content. It was comforting to cuddle and feel her close to me, something I hadn't experienced in a long while. She ended up staying the entire night. I rose before her and prepared French toast for us. Emerging from the bedroom, she wore one of my t-shirts, which looked particularly fetching on her. I couldn't help but express my admiration for how wonderful she looked, even in the morning. After a quick shower, we sat down to talk. Angie, what do you envision for our future? You know how much I love you, and my children and family adore you. What are your thoughts on what comes next? Ray, I feel like I'm sounding like a lawyer. We've only known each other for a few months, and last night was our first time making love. I understand it's early, but I want you in my life every day. If we haven't had our fill of love, we can return to the bedroom and spend the whole day there. Angie smiled at the suggestion. Angie, I want you to be my wife. Will you marry me? Tears welled in Angie's eyes. Ray, I want you to know I don't take love lightly. I've made mistakes before, as I've told you. Yes, I will marry you. I promise to always be there for you and the kids. I know the pain of your past marriage, and I vow to be honest and faithful. I expect the same from you. She leaned in and kissed me passionately. Honey, what's on your mind? You seem happy yet sad, I inquired. These are my reflections on my dad, and how joyful he will be. Many young girls dream of their special wedding day, envisioning themselves in a white dress, escorted down the aisle by their father to meet their future spouse. I realize that won't be my reality, and it saddens me deeply. She shed quiet tears. Last time, my father wasn't even aware of my wedding. By the time I reached out to him, I had suffered a mishap and was on the path to divorce. I'm sorry, Ray, I shouldn't dwell on this now. After all, I'm marrying the man my father approves of, the one I've loved since our first meeting. What? You loved me from the start. I've wanted you since I laid eyes on you, but I guess you already knew that, I remarked, surprised. She gave me a sweet smile and asked when I wanted to set the date. I responded that it was entirely up to her. We both agreed it should happen as soon as possible. I asked if I could start spreading the news, and she said she would do the same. We just needed to settle on a date. We settled on 2 months from then. For the next few days, I was elated. I shared the news with Amy and her husband Kenny, who were thrilled for us. I needed to inform the kids. I called their home and connected with them both through the console so I could share the news simultaneously. They both exclaimed their happiness and expressed their fondness for Angie. I assured them it was happening in a couple of months, and that they were among the first to know. When I entered Angie's office, her secretary Mary congratulated me. She informed me that Angie had already spread the news and invited everyone to the wedding reception. Mary then called Angie and beckoned me in. Angie was waiting, tears silently streaming down her face. What's wrong, Angie? I called the prison, spoke to the warden, and requested a day's leave for my dad to attend our wedding. He informed me that my dad is prohibited from leaving the prison under any circumstances. His life sentence is final. He expressed regret, but said there was nothing he could do. I'm deeply sorry, Angie. I understand how much your father's presence means to you. It's deteriorating, Ray. Despite being in remission, Dad's cancer has resurfaced. He has 3 to 6 months left. Tears welled in her eyes, and I enveloped her in my arms. Why, Lord? Why put her through this? She's a good soul. My heart ached for her. Angie, I've been buying cigarettes for your dad since I got out. It was a deal between us. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. Dad doesn't smoke anymore. He uses the packs sent to him to trade with other inmates. You didn't cause his cancer. An idea sparked in my mind, but I hesitated to share it with Angie, not wanting to extinguish her hope. I kissed her goodbye, promising to see her the next day. I skipped work and headed to the prison to meet Keeler and the warden. Keeler greeted me with a smile. You take care of my girl, Ray. Just make her happy. She deserves better than what life's thrown her way. I pitched my idea to Keeler, met with initial resistance, but eventually secured his agreement pending the warden's approval. I bid him farewell, heading to the warden's office. The warden welcomed me. Well, Ray, I see you're staying composed and getting hitched. Sorry about Keeler, but as a lifer, we can't release him for his daughter's wedding. Warden, are you fully in charge here, making most decisions? What's your angle, Ray? Can we hold the wedding on the hotel premises? Use the chapel and Keeler can walk his daughter down the aisle. You want to marry here in prison just so her father can attend? That it? Yes, sir. She hasn't seen him in over 14 years and he's on his end of the rope. We only need the chapel for the ceremony. I know weddings have happened here before. All right, Ray. I'll arrange it. Keep it small. You can invite 3 guests besides yourselves. Let Keeler bring some fellow inmates. You'll need a prison attendant. I expressed gratitude to the warden and hurried back to Keeler. Dave, I called him by name, and he chuckled. The warden green-lighted the plan. I'm off to tell Angie. Thanks, Dave. It means the world to her. He smiled. Ray, jot down this number. I noted it down for Angie. When you visit the bank, ask Angie to bring her birth certificate. The account is registered under her maiden name. I jotted down, expressing sympathy for Dave's illness. Just look after my little girl, that's all I ask, Dave responded. Returning to Angie's office, she noticed my smile and inquired what was happening. You don't mind getting married in prison? I questioned. What? What's this about, Ray? I recounted my conversation with the warden, mentioning that her father would be permitted to walk her down the aisle. Tears of joy welled up in her eyes. God, I love you, Ray. I informed her about the safety deposit box, and we proceeded to inspect its contents. I'm Angelina Juanita Miller, and I'd like to access my safety deposit box, Angie informed the attendant, who examined her birth certificate. He escorted us to the safe deposit box, unlocked it, and exited the room. The first thing we noticed was a note from her father. Dear Angie, if you're opening this box, it means you're either getting married or I've already passed away. I hope it's the former. In the little box is your mother's engagement ring. I know everyone wondered where it went, but I put it here for safekeeping. I want you to have it and wear it with pride. Your mother had her faults, but she loved you, and I know she would want you to have her wedding ring. There are also bonds here, totaling over $15,000 that will help pay for your wedding. I formalized them before I was sent away. When you see your brother and sister, tell them there's a box for each of them too, if they haven't gotten theirs yet. Only yours has a ring in it. Congratulations, and always be honest with your husband. With love, Daddy. Angie and I discussed our wedding plans, opting to invite her brother Brad and sister Lisa, along with my sister Amy. We planned to extend invitations to family and friends for the reception, scheduled shortly after the ceremony. Angie and Amy dedicated the following month to preparing for the event, although it incurred additional expenses due to the short notice. However, I was determined to fulfill as much of Angie's dream as possible. Amy volunteered to capture the event with her digital camera. We visited Angie's siblings, where she introduced me to them. They clarified that while they didn't harbor animosity towards their father, they disapproved of his actions. Angie elucidated the significance of the wedding and the circumstances surrounding it, leading Brad and Lisa to tears upon learning of their father's terminal condition. After agreeing to attend, Angie provided them with their bank deposit box numbers, revealing their father's unexpected provisions. On the wedding day, Angie and I drove to the prison together, accompanied by Amy and her husband, who waited in the car. Upon our arrival, I arranged for a costume for Keeler, delivered by a guard, while I donned the rented tuxedo. Amy assisted Angie with her wedding attire in another room, as Angie preferred I not see her until the ceremony. Inside the chapel, I awaited Angie's entrance alongside Brad and Lisa, who would serve as my best man and Angie's maid of honor, respectively. A prisoner played the piano, setting a solemn atmosphere, while additional prisoners, friends of Keeler Dave, were seated. The warden, accompanied by the priest, announced refreshments after the ceremony, displaying unexpected kindness. As "Here Comes the Bride" filled the chapel, everyone rose to their feet. Angie entered, escorted by her father, tears streaming down both their faces. Angie's wish had been granted. Her father would walk her down the aisle on her wedding day. Once they reached the front, the audience took their seats, leaving only the small wedding party standing. Another guard entered and shut the door. The priest inquired, "Who presents this woman to marry this man?" "Yes, sir," Dave responded proudly before taking his seat. "Angelina Juanita Miller Brady, do you accept Raymond Michael Harper as your husband?" The priest proceeded with the ceremony, posing the same question to me. We both solemnly affirmed, "To love and cherish from this day forward." It reflected our mutual commitment. Nothing would ever come between us. With challenging pasts, we were determined to make our marriage succeed. After exchanging vows, I kissed the bride. Angie then embraced and kissed her father. We adjourned to an adjoining room to chat briefly and partake in cake and punch provided by the warden. Brad and Lisa approached their father, embracing him for the first time in nearly 15 years. Tears flowed, mingling joy with remorse. Aware of their father's terminal condition, they sought to reaffirm their love for him. Amy documented moments throughout the ceremony, capturing heartfelt interactions among Dave and his children. Her photos, encompassing tears, embraces, and even some laughter, were swiftly developed and enlarged at a 24-hour photo center. Expressing gratitude to Dave and the warden for fulfilling Angie's wish, we bid them farewell. As we departed, Brad and Lisa were still engaged in conversation with their father, a heartening sight. Returning to town for the reception, we were greeted enthusiastically by all our invited guests. Kyle and Kayla eagerly embraced us upon our arrival, their excitement palpable. Entering the auditorium, we were met with jubilant cheers. Tears welled in the eyes of my parents and nearly everyone who greeted us. Angie's friends, many unfamiliar to me, also welcomed us warmly. Notably, Mary approached, offering hugs of congratulations. Around 30 minutes later, Amy arrived with the photographs. She enlarged several of them and laid them out on the table for everyone to view. Brad and Lisa stopped by to collect their families. Brad was accompanied by his wife and 2 children, while Lisa was with her husband and 3 children. They all gathered around Dave's picture, explaining to the kids that he was their grandfather. Amy informed them that she had taken 4 sets of photos, and after the reception, each family would receive 1 set to take home. There was one for Brad and Lisa, one for Angie and me, and naturally, one for Amy. I must mention how stunning Angie looked in her wedding gown. If she had wings, she would have resembled an angel sent by God. She was the most exquisite woman I had ever seen, and now she was my wife. I believe most men feel similarly about their wives. We danced, dined, and danced some more, accompanied by the clinking of glasses. Our lips were practically inseparable throughout the evening. Colleagues at work told me I was incredibly fortunate, but trust me, I didn't need to be reminded. I knew I had found something precious, and I intended to cherish it forever. For those curious, Deb and Pat were absent from our wedding. It was Angie's special day, and I wanted nothing to mar it. Witnessing her and her father walking down the aisle, seeing her brother and sister reconcile with their father, and witnessing the family coming together once more. These are moments I will never forget. Update. It's been 6 months since our wedding. Debbie and Pat tied the knot last month. I'm glad to see Debbie making a genuine effort to turn her life around. My kids report that Pat is treating them well. I inquired about Aunt Sue and Uncle Bob, and my kids informed me they relocated to another state. I transitioned to the day shift to spend more time with the kids and be home with Angie every night. Angie became pregnant with our baby 3 months after our wedding. Dave Keeler passed away. The kids visited him monthly until his passing. It was a somber moment, but we were able to share the news of Angie's pregnancy with him. We informed him it was a boy, and we planned to name him David Raymond. That brought a smile to Dave's face. Reflecting on everything, the betrayal of my cheating wife, meeting the woman of my dreams in prison, and marrying her, I realize I'm starting anew and preparing to become a father once more. Not a day passes without me thanking God for all I have. I'm grateful for the opportunity He's given Angie and me to find happiness again. That's all.
Story 5. Brandon McAllister's fingers flew across the keyboard, lines of code materializing on his monitor. The soft glow of the screen illuminated his face in the dimly lit home office. He glanced at the clock at 9:37 p.m. Another late night. A gentle knock on the door broke his concentration. "Brandon," Jessica's voice called from the hallway. "Can we talk?" He sighed, saving his work before swiveling in his chair. "Come in." Jessica entered, her athletic frame outlined by the hallway light. Her usual vivaciousness seemed muted, replaced by an unsettling calmness. She perched on the edge of the leather sofa, hands clasped in her lap. "What's up?" Brandon asked, trying to read her expression. Jessica took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about our marriage." Brandon's stomach tightened. They'd been distant lately, sure, but he'd chalked it up to busy schedules. He'd been pulling long hours at work, and Jessica's fitness training business was booming. "Okay," he said cautiously. "What about it?" "I think—" Jessica paused, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I think I need more freedom." Brandon's brow furrowed. "Freedom? What do you mean?" Jessica finally met his eyes. "I'll be gaining experience with other men for a few years. You have to accept my rules." The words hit Brandon like a physical blow. He stared at his wife of 12 years, the mother of their children, struggling to comprehend what she was saying. "You want to sleep with other men?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jessica nodded. "It's not just about sex. I need to explore, to grow. Our marriage has become stagnant." Anger flared in Brandon's chest, replacing the initial shock. "Stagnant? Because I've been working hard to provide for our family." "That's not what I meant," Jessica backpedaled. "I just feel like we've lost our spark. This could reignite things between us." Brandon stood up, pacing the small office. His mind raced, trying to process this betrayal. Suddenly, a thought struck him, and he turned to face Jessica. "Fine," he said, his voice cold. "Then I'll also be comparing you with other women." Jessica's face hardened, her eyes flashing with anger. Clearly, she hadn't expected this response. "That's not what I meant. This is about my journey, my growth." "And what about my journey?" Brandon shot back. "What about our vows? Our children?" "The kids don't have to know," Jessica argued. "We can keep things civil, maintain appearances." "Appearances?" Brandon interrupted. "Is that all our marriage is to you now? An appearance to maintain?" Jessica stood up, her calm facade cracking. "You're twisting my words. I'm trying to be honest with you, to give our marriage a chance." "By sleeping with other men?" Brandon's voice rose. "How exactly does that give our marriage a chance?" "You don't understand," Jessica yelled, frustration evident in her tone. "I need this. I need to feel alive again." "And I make you feel dead inside?" Brandon asked, his words dripping with sarcasm. 12 years of marriage, 2 children, and this is what it comes down to? Jessica's eyes welled with tears. "That's not fair. You've been so distant, always working. When was the last time we truly connected?" Brandon laughed bitterly. "So this is my fault? I work hard to give us a good life, and your solution is to screw other men." "Stop twisting everything," Jessica shouted. "This isn't about blame. It's about growth, about rediscovering ourselves." "No," Brandon said firmly. "This is about you being selfish. You want to have your cake and eat it too. Well, I won't stand for it." Jessica's tears spilled over. "Why can't you understand? I'm not leaving you. I just need more. More than your husband? More than your family." Brandon's voice was filled with disgust. "Get out of my office. I can't even look at you right now." Jessica opened her mouth to argue, then thought better of it. She turned and left, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Brandon collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. How had it come to this? 12 years of marriage, reduced to rubble in a single conversation. He thought of their children, Mia and Ray, peacefully asleep down the hall, blissfully unaware of the bomb that had just detonated in their parents' relationship. As the initial shock wore off, a new emotion began to take hold, determination. Brandon straightened in his chair, jaw set. If Jessica thought she could drop this on him and walk away unscathed, she had another thing coming. He opened a new document on his computer and began typing, meticulously recording every detail of their conversation. Dates, times, exact words used, nothing would escape his documentation. This would be the first entry in what he already knew would become a comprehensive record of Jessica's betrayal. Over the next few days, Brandon watched Jessica closely. He noted her late nights at the gym, the hushed phone conversations, the unexplained absences. Each observation was dutifully logged in his growing digital journal. As he lay in bed one night, Jessica sleeping soundly beside him, Brandon's mind wandered to the early days of their relationship. He remembered the spark in Jessica's eyes when they first met at a mutual friend's barbecue. Her laughter had been infectious, her zest for life inspiring. When had that changed? When had her priorities shifted from their relationship to her image, her personal gratification? Brandon turned away from his sleeping wife, a plan forming in his mind. He would not confront Jessica, directly not yet. First, he would gather irrefutable evidence. He would expose her betrayal, not just to himself, but to everyone in their lives. And when the time came, he would make sure she faced the full consequences of her actions. The next morning, Brandon kissed Jessica goodbye as she left for work, the picture of a devoted husband. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, he sprang into action. He made his way to Jessica's home office, a space he rarely entered out of respect for her privacy. Now, that respect felt like a joke. He booted up her computer, grateful that she had never thought to change her password from the one they shared for household accounts. Brandon's fingers flew across the keyboard as he combed through her emails, text messages, and social media accounts. What he found made his blood boil. Flirtatious messages with multiple men, some dating back months. Plans for coffee dates that suspiciously coincided with her late nights at the gym. Pictures of Jessica at bars and clubs, dressed in outfits he had never seen, hanging off the arms of strangers. Brandon downloaded everything he could find, saving copies to a secure cloud storage account. As he worked, a notification popped up on Jessica's phone, which she had left charging on the desk. A text message from someone named Tony. Can't wait to see you later, sexy. Bile rose in Brandon's throat. He forced himself to take a deep breath, channeling his anger into determination. He would not confront Jessica now, would not give her the chance to delete evidence or concoct excuses. No, he would bide his time, building an airtight case against her. Over the next few weeks, Brandon threw himself into his work with renewed vigor. His colleagues noticed the change, commenting on his increased productivity and innovative ideas. Little did they know that his work served as both a distraction and a means to an end. Every raise, every accolade, was another weapon in his arsenal against Jessica's betrayal. One evening, as Brandon was preparing dinner for the kids, Jessica breezed into the kitchen. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, planting a kiss on his cheek. "Smells delicious," she purred. "You're such a wonderful husband." Brandon stiffened at her touch, but forced himself to relax. He turned, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks. How was your day?" Jessica launched into a story about a difficult client at the gym, her animated gestures and lively tone a stark contrast to the woman who had sat in his office weeks ago, calmly announcing her intention to destroy their marriage. As she talked, Brandon studied her. The flush in her cheeks, the slight hoarseness in her voice, was it from her intense workout, or from activities with one of her dates? The thought made his stomach turn, but he maintained his facade of the attentive husband. "That sounds challenging," he said when she finished her story. "But I'm sure you handled it beautifully." "You always do." Jessica beamed at him, clearly pleased by the compliment. "You're sweet. I'm so lucky to have you." The irony of her words was not lost on Brandon. He turned back to the stove, using the excuse of stirring the sauce to hide the flash of anger in his eyes. "I'm the lucky one," he managed to say. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, Brandon sat in his office, updating his journal. He recorded every detail of Jessica's behavior, her overly affectionate gestures, the subtle signs of guilt in her eyes, the way she overcompensated with effusive praise for him. As he typed, a plan began to form in his mind. He would need hard evidence, not just digital records and secondhand observations. He needed to catch Jessica in the act. The opportunity presented itself sooner than he expected. The following Saturday, Jessica announced she was meeting some friends for brunch. "Have fun," Brandon said, not looking up from his laptop. "Say hi to the girls for me." Jessica hesitated in the doorway. "You don't mind watching the kids?" Brandon finally met her gaze, his expression neutral. "Of course not. Go. Enjoy yourself. You deserve it." A flicker of guilt passed over Jessica's face, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "Thanks, honey. I won't be too late." As soon as Jessica's car disappeared down the street, Brandon sprang into action. He called their regular babysitter, citing a work emergency. Within 20 minutes, he was in his own car, following the familiar route to Magnolia Cafe, Jessica's favorite brunch spot. He parked across the street, his heart pounding as he scanned the outdoor seating area. There she was, seated at a table with a man Brandon didn't recognize. Tall, well-built, with perfectly coiffed hair and an expensive watch glinting in the sunlight. Jessica threw her head back, laughing at something the man said, her hand resting on his arm. Brandon's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. He forced himself to take slow, deep breaths. This was what he wanted, irrefutable proof. He couldn't lose control now. Reaching for his phone, Brandon began to take photos. Jessica and her companion, leaning close over the table, their hands intertwined. The man brushing a strand of hair from Jessica's face, his touch lingering far too long for a casual acquaintance. After what felt like hours, but was likely only 45 minutes, Jessica and the mystery man stood up. Brandon ducked down in his seat as they walked past, heading toward a nearby park. He waited a few moments before following at a discreet distance. In the park, Jessica and her companion strolled hand in hand, pausing occasionally to share intimate whispers and lingering touches. Brandon's stomach churned as he watched his wife lean in for a passionate kiss, right there in broad daylight. He'd seen enough. With shaking hands, Brandon started his car and drove home, arriving just minutes before Jessica. He was in the backyard with the kids when she walked in, looking flushed and happy. "Hey, you're back," Brandon called out, plastering a smile on his face. "How was brunch?" Jessica's smile faltered for a moment before she recovered. "Oh, it was great. The girls say hi." Brandon nodded, turning his attention back to Mia and Ray. "Glad you had fun," he said, his tone light even as rage simmered beneath the surface. That night, after the kids were asleep, Brandon sat in his office, staring at the photos he'd taken. Each image was a dagger to his heart, but also a piece of armor for the battle ahead. He knew now, without a shadow of a doubt, that his marriage was over. But he would end it on his terms, not Jessica's. He began to formulate his strategy. Financial records would need to be secured. Lawyers consulted discreetly. Evidence was compiled and organized. Brandon would leave nothing to chance. As he worked late into the night, a new emotion began to take hold alongside the anger and betrayal. It was a feeling of power, of control reclaimed. Jessica might have shattered their marriage, but she hadn't broken him. From the ashes of her betrayal, a new Brandon was emerging stronger, more resolute, and determined to not just survive this ordeal, but to triumph over it. The war had begun, and Brandon intended to win. Brandon sat across from Jessica at the kitchen table, his face a mask of calm as he sipped his morning coffee. Inside, he seethed with anger and disgust, but he forced himself to maintain the facade of a supportive husband. "So," he began, his voice carefully neutral, "how's your new freedom going?" Jessica looked up from her phone, surprise flickering across her face. "Oh, it's going well, I guess. Are you sure you want to hear about this?" Brandon shrugged, the picture of nonchalance. "Why not? We're still married, aren't we? I want to be supportive of your experiences." Jessica hesitated, clearly caught off guard by his apparent acceptance. "Well, if you're sure, I've been meeting some interesting people. It's been eye-opening, really." "I bet," Brandon murmured, taking another sip of coffee. "Anyone in particular stand out?" "There's this one guy, Anthony," Jessica said, a small smile playing on her lips. "He's a businessman. Very successful, very charming." Brandon nodded, his grip on the coffee mug tightening imperceptibly. "Sounds intriguing. And how does he compare to your boring, old software developer husband?" Jessica's smile faltered. "Brandon, it's not like that. You know I still care about you. This isn't a competition, isn't it?" Brandon countered, his tone still light, but with an edge creeping in. "You're out there comparing me to other men. Seems only fair I get to do the same." Jessica's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Brandon leaned back in his chair, a hint of a smirk on his face. "Oh, didn't I mention? I've been spending some time with Ava from work. Brilliant woman, really. So passionate about her projects." He watched as Jessica's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally settled on a forced calm. I see," she said, her voice tight. And how is that going? Brandon shrugged again. It's going well. She's quite impressed by my work ethic. Says it's refreshing to meet a man so dedicated to his career. Jessica stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I have to get ready for work, she muttered, leaving her half-eaten breakfast on the table. As she left the room, Brandon allowed himself a small, grim smile. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Now it was time to tend to them and watch them grow. Over the next few weeks, Brandon continued his charade of supportive husband by day, while meticulously executing his plan by night. He started with their finances, carefully moving money into accounts Jessica couldn't access. Each transaction was documented. Each move calculated to protect his assets without raising suspicion. One evening, as he sat in his home office reviewing their financial statements, Jessica knocked on the door. Come in, Brandon called, quickly minimizing the windows on his computer screen. Jessica entered, looking uncertain. Hey, I was wondering if we could talk about our bank accounts. I tried to make a transfer earlier, but it seems like some of our joint accounts have changed. Brandon turned to face her, his expression neutral. Oh, that's odd. What seems to be the problem? Well, Jessica began, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. I couldn't access our savings account, and the balance in our checking account seems lower than I expected. Brandon furrowed his brow, the picture of concern. Really? That's strange. I'll look into it. Maybe there was a glitch in the system. Could you? Jessica asked, relief evident in her voice. I'd really appreciate it. Of course, Brandon replied smoothly. I'll call the bank first thing tomorrow. Was there something specific you needed the money for? Jessica hesitated, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. Oh no, nothing specific. I just wanted to make sure everything was in order. Brandon nodded, turning back to his computer. No problem. I'll sort it out. As Jessica left the room, Brandon allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. His plan was working perfectly. He was slowly but surely cutting off Jessica's access to their shared resources, all while maintaining the appearance of a helpful, unsuspecting husband. The next day at work, Brandon found himself in the break room with Ava, the co-worker he'd mentioned to Jessica. Ava was indeed brilliant, with a quick wit and a passion for coding that matched Brandon's own. In another life, perhaps? Earth to Brandon, Ava said, waving a hand in front of his face. Where'd you go just now? Brandon blinked, focusing on Ava's concerned face. Sorry, just lost in thought. This project's really keeping me on my toes. Ava nodded sympathetically. I hear you. But hey, that's what makes it exciting, right? The challenge of it all. Absolutely, Brandon agreed, a genuine smile crossing his face. It's nice to work with someone who gets it. Speaking of which, Ava said, leaning in conspiratorially, I had an idea about the encryption algorithm we've been struggling with. Want to grab dinner after work and go over it? Brandon hesitated for a moment, thinking of Jessica at home. Then he remembered the photos on his phone, the evidence of her betrayal. You know what? That sounds great. I'm in. As they left work that evening, Brandon sent a quick text to Jessica, working late on a tough project. Don't wait up. He and Ava found a quiet bistro near the office, their conversation flowing easily from work to more personal topics. Brandon found himself relaxing for the first time in weeks, enjoying the simple pleasure of intellectual conversation without the undercurrent of betrayal and resentment that now colored his interactions with Jessica. As they were finishing their meal, Ava looked at Brandon with concern. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem, I don't know, different lately. Is everything okay? Brandon considered his response carefully. Things at home have been challenging, he admitted, but throwing myself into work has been a good distraction. Ava nodded sympathetically. I'm sorry to hear that, but I have to say, whatever's going on, it seems to be bringing out the best in you professionally. Your focus and drive lately have been really impressive. Brandon felt a warmth in his chest at her words, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Thank you, Ava. That means a lot. As they parted ways that night, Brandon found himself looking forward to seeing Ava again. It wasn't about revenge or making Jessica jealous, he realized. It was about rediscovering his own worth, separate from his failing marriage. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work, secret planning, and carefully orchestrated encounters. Brandon made sure to mention Ava casually in conversation with Jessica, watching as uncertainty and jealousy flickered in her eyes. At the same time, he continued to play the role of supportive husband, always ready with an understanding ear when Jessica wanted to talk about her experiences. One Saturday afternoon, Brandon decided it was time to gather more concrete evidence. He knew Jessica was meeting Anthony at an upscale restaurant downtown. Under the guise of a work emergency, Brandon made his way to the restaurant, his heart pounding as he entered. He spotted Jessica and Anthony at a corner table, their heads close together as they talked intimately. Brandon's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to remain calm. He found a seat at the bar with a clear view of their table and ordered a drink. As he sipped his whiskey, Brandon strained to hear their conversation. He couldn't make out every word, but what he did hear made his blood boil. "I just don't know if I can keep living this double life," Jessica was saying, her voice low but intense. Anthony reached across the table, taking her hand. "Then don't. Leave him. We could have a real life together, Jess." Brandon nearly crushed the glass in his hand. He watched as Jessica's face cycled through emotions: longing, guilt, fear. "It's not that simple," she replied. "There's the kids to think about, and I don't know. Part of me still cares for Brandon." Anthony scoffed. "Cares for him? If you really cared, you wouldn't be here with me. Face it, Jess. Your marriage is over. You're just prolonging the inevitable." Brandon had heard enough. He downed the rest of his drink and slipped out of the restaurant, his mind racing. So, Jessica was considering leaving him for this Anthony character. Well, two could play at that game. When he got home, Brandon locked himself in his office and pulled out his phone. He hesitated for a moment before dialing Ava's number. "Brandon." Ava answered, surprise evident in her voice. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, Brandon paused, gathering his thoughts. "I was wondering if you'd like to grab dinner tomorrow night, to celebrate the project milestone." There was a moment of silence on the other end. "Sure," Ava finally said, her tone cautious but pleased. "That sounds nice. Where should we meet?" Brandon named a restaurant, the same one where he'd just seen Jessica and Anthony. "Great," he said, a grim satisfaction settling over him. "I'll see you there at 7. The next evening, Brandon dressed with care, choosing a shirt he knew Jessica had always liked on him. He found her in the living room, scrolling through her phone. "Heading out?" Jessica asked, looking up as he entered. Brandon nodded. "Dinner with Ava. Celebrating a big win at work." He watched as Jessica's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, that's nice. Have fun." "Thanks," Brandon replied, his tone light. "Don't wait up." As he left, he could feel Jessica's eyes boring into his back. Good, he thought. Let her wonder. Let her worry. The dinner with Ava was pleasant, their conversation flowing easily between work and more personal topics. Brandon found himself genuinely enjoying her company, even as part of him remained hyper-aware of their surroundings, half expecting Jessica or Anthony to walk in at any moment. As they were finishing their meal, Ava looked at Brandon with concern. "Brandon, can I ask you something?" He nodded, bracing himself. "What's really going on?" Ava asked gently. "I mean, I enjoy spending time with you, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this than just work camaraderie." Brandon sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're right," he admitted. "Things at home, they're not good. My wife, well, let's just say our marriage isn't what I thought it was." Ava reached across the table, squeezing his hand sympathetically. "I'm so sorry, Brandon. That must be incredibly difficult." As Brandon looked into Ava's kind eyes, he felt a sudden urge to tell her everything: the betrayal, the pain, his plans for revenge. But he held back. No matter how understanding Ava might be, he couldn't risk his carefully laid plans. "Thank you," he said instead, managing a small smile. "It helps to have a friend like you." As they left the restaurant, Brandon couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He scanned the area discreetly, but saw no sign of Jessica or Anthony. Still, the prickle of unease remained. The next morning, Brandon awoke to find Jessica already up, pacing in the kitchen. When she saw him, her eyes narrowed. "Have a nice dinner?" she asked, her tone deceptively casual. Brandon poured himself a cup of coffee, matching her casual tone. "It was fine. Good to celebrate a win, you know?" Jessica nodded, her jaw tight. And Ava? She's just a co-worker, right? Brandon turned to face her, his expression neutral. What are you asking, Jessica? I'm asking if you're sleeping with her. Jessica exploded, her calm facade crumbling. Brandon raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of his coffee. Interesting. You seem upset by the idea. I thought we were both gaining experiences now. Jessica's face flushed with anger and something else, fear, perhaps? That's different, she sputtered. I told you about it. I was honest. Brandon set down his coffee cup, his voice dangerously quiet. Honest? Is that what you call it? Telling your husband you're going to sleep with other men, and he just has to accept it? That's not. Jessica stammered, taken aback by the steel in Brandon's voice. Let me be clear, Brandon continued, his tone icy. What I do, who I see, that's no longer any of your business. You made your choice, Jessica. Now you get to live with the consequences. With that, he turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Jessica staring after him, her face a mix of shock and dawning realization. As he showered and dressed for work, Brandon's mind raced. The confrontation with Jessica had been satisfying, but he knew it was just the beginning. He had the upper hand now, but he couldn't afford to get complacent. At work, Brandon threw himself into his projects with renewed vigor. His colleagues noticed the change, commenting on his increased productivity and innovative ideas. Ava, in particular, seemed impressed by his drive. Whatever's going on in your personal life, she said one afternoon as they worked side by side, it seems to be bringing out the best in you professionally. Brandon smiled grimly. Sometimes, adversity can be a powerful motivator. As the weeks passed, Brandon continued to gather evidence of Jessica's infidelity while simultaneously distancing himself emotionally and financially from their marriage. He documented every late night, every suspicious text, every unexplained absence. At the same time, he quietly moved their assets, ensuring that when the time came, he would be prepared. One evening, as Brandon sat in his home office reviewing the mountain of evidence he collected, he heard a soft knock at the door. It was Mia, their daughter, her small face pinched with worry. Dad, she said hesitantly, can I talk to you? Brandon immediately set aside his work, giving Mia his full attention. Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? Mia climbed into his lap, something she hadn't done in years. Are you and Mom getting a divorce? The question hit Brandon like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on his plans, on gathering evidence and protecting himself, that he'd almost forgotten the impact all of this would have on their children. Why do you ask that, Mia? He said carefully, buying time to formulate his response. Mia shrugged, her eyes downcast. You and Mom are always fighting, and you're never home at the same time anymore. That's what happened to Jimmy's parents before they got divorced. Brandon's heart ached for his daughter. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her everything would be okay. But he also knew he couldn't lie to her. Mia, he said gently, I want you to know that no matter what happens between me and your mom, we both love you and Ray more than anything in the world. That will never change. Mia looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. But are you getting divorced? Brandon took a deep breath. I don't know yet, sweetheart. Your mom and I are going through a tough time right now. We're trying to figure things out. Mia nodded solemnly, digesting this information. If you do get divorced, will we have to move? Will I have to change schools? No, absolutely not, Brandon said firmly. No matter what happens, I promise you won't have to leave your home or your school. Okay. Mia nodded again, wrapping her arms around Brandon's neck. Okay. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetie, Brandon whispered, holding his daughter close. More than you could ever know. As Mia left the room, Brandon felt a renewed sense of purpose. He'd been so focused on his revenge against Jessica that he'd lost sight of what truly mattered to his children. From now on, every move he made would be with Mia and Ray's best interests in mind. The next day, Brandon made an appointment with a divorce lawyer. It was time to start preparing for the inevitable. As he sat in the lawyer's office, laying out the evidence he'd gathered and explaining the situation, he felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Well, Mr. McAllister, the lawyer said after Brandon had finished his explanation, based on what you've told me and the evidence you've gathered, I'd say you're in a very strong position. Your wife's infidelity, combined with her attempt to force you into an open marriage, gives us solid grounds for divorce. Brandon nodded, a grim satisfaction settling over him. And the children? Given the circumstances, I believe we have a good case for primary custody, the lawyer replied. Of course, nothing is certain in these matters, but your dedication to your children's well-being and stability will work in your favor. Brandon left the lawyer's office feeling both empowered and burdened. The end of his marriage was now a tangible reality, not just a vague future possibility. But he couldn't dwell on that now. He had preparations to make. Over the next few days, Brandon carefully laid the groundwork for his final confrontation with Jessica. He triple-checked his financial arrangements, ensuring that all their major assets were secure. He prepared a detailed timeline of Jessica's infidelity, complete with photographic evidence and records of her suspicious activities. Finally, he felt ready. On a Friday evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Brandon found Jessica in the living room, scrolling through her phone with a slight smile on her face. "We need to talk," Brandon said, his voice calm but firm. Jessica looked up, her smile fading as she saw the serious expression on Brandon's face. "Okay," she said cautiously. "What about?" Brandon sat down across from her, meeting her gaze steadily. "I know about Anthony," he said without preamble. "I know about all of it, Jessica." Jessica's face paled, her phone slipping from her suddenly nerveless fingers. What are you talking about?" "Don't," Brandon cut her off, his voice hard. "Don't insult me by lying. I've seen you with him. I have pictures, texts, everything." Jessica's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. Finally, she managed to whisper, "How long have you known?" "Long enough," Brandon replied. "Long enough to protect myself and our children from your selfishness." Jessica's shock was quickly replaced by anger. "My selfishness? I told you what I needed. I was honest with you." Brandon laughed bitterly. "Honest? Is that what you call it? Telling your husband you're going to sleep with other men, and he just has to accept it? That's not honesty, Jessica. That's cruelty." I never meant to hurt you," Jessica stammered, tears welling in her eyes. "Save it," Brandon said coldly. "I'm not interested in your excuses or your tears. I'm here to tell you how this is going to go." He pulled out a folder and placed it on the coffee table between them. "This contains divorce papers, along with evidence of your infidelity. You have two choices. You can sign these papers and agree to my terms, or we can go to court where I will air every dirty detail of your affair." Jessica stared at the folder as if it might bite her. "Your terms?" she asked weakly. Brandon nodded. "I get primary custody of the kids. You get visitation rights, but they live with me. I keep the house and my retirement accounts. You get a fair settlement, but nothing close to half." That's not fair," Jessica protested, her voice rising. "You can't just decide all this on your own, can I?" Brandon countered. "You decided to destroy our marriage on your own. You decided to betray our vows, to risk our children's stability, all for your own selfish desires. Now I'm deciding how we end this." Jessica's face crumpled, the reality of the situation finally hitting her. "Brandon, please," she begged. "We can work this out. We can go to counseling, try to fix things." Brandon shook his head, unmoved by her pleas. "There's nothing to fix, Jessica. You broke us beyond repair. This isn't a negotiation. It's an ultimatum. Sign the papers, or I'll see you in court." With that, he stood up and walked out of the room, leaving Jessica staring at the folder that represented the end of their marriage. As he climbed the stairs to check on the sleeping children, Brandon felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The confrontation he'd been dreading for months was over. Now, he could focus on rebuilding his life and ensuring a stable future for Mia and Ray. The next morning, Brandon awoke to find the signed divorce papers on his desk. Jessica had packed a bag and left a note saying she was staying with a friend for a few days to process everything. Brandon felt a mix of relief and sadness as he read the note. Despite everything, a part of him mourned the end of their 12-year marriage. But as he heard Mia and Ray stirring in their rooms, Brandon steeled himself. There would be time for reflection later. Right now, his children needed him to be strong, to guide them through the upheaval that was to come. As he made breakfast for the kids, Brandon allowed himself a small smile. For the first time in months, he felt truly in control of his life. Jessica's betrayal had nearly broken him, but he had emerged stronger, more determined. He had protected himself and his children, and now he could look to the future with hope rather than dread. The war was over, and Brandon had won. But as he watched Mia and Ray chatting over their cereal, blissfully unaware of the changes about to rock their world, he knew the real challenge was just beginning. Rebuilding their lives, helping his children heal, learning to trust again, these would be Brandon's new battles. But as he sipped his coffee and listened to his children's laughter, Brandon felt ready for whatever lay ahead. He had survived Jessica's betrayal, protected what mattered most, and reclaimed his life. Whatever challenges the future held, he would face them head-on, with the same determination and strength that had brought him through this ordeal. The chapter of his life with Jessica was over. Now it was time to start writing a new one.